Chapter 3573. In the middle of every month, Gong Fan would return to Ashland Island with Lisa. The medication that Alice had concocted could only last for about 30 days. She had to renew the medication every month. His sleep condition was very bad. He had insomnia, many dreams, and nightmares. His mental strength was also very weak. If not for the special sleeping pills that Alice had concocted, it would be very difficult for him to fall asleep peacefully. Other than that, his body also needed regular checkups. He returned to Ashland Island before the middle of the month. Just as he returned to the island, Lisa received a call from Alice. Alice said that she would arrive at the island early the next morning. Lisa could not help but feel a little suspicious. Originally, Alice would arrive on the 15th of every month. Tomorrow was the 12th. What was going on? Alice explained that there was a new batch of medication that had been improved and would replace the previous batch. Lisa no longer doubted him after hearing that. Before this, Xiao Chen had already disguised himself and sneaked onto the ship that was heading to Ashland Island. It would take an entire night to reach Ashland Island from the hurricane headquarters. Alice's makeup skills were top-notch. She applied makeup on Gong Jie and Xiao Chen and easily fooled them. After all, with Alice's face, she would not be put in a difficult position. She lied and said that Gong Jie and Xiao Chen were her assistants. Gong Jie was still all right. He used a wig to replace his original silver hair. This made it very difficult for people to recognize him. Xiao Chen, on the other hand, was much more aggrieved. He was not considered short for his age. He was about 1.5 meters tall, which was already considered very tall. However, it was still difficult for him to disguise himself as an adult man. Hence, Alice put on a woman's wig for him. He wore a white lab coat and put on some rouge. He was already very good-looking and had the unique aura of a young man. After a little makeup, he really looked like a young woman. After spending a night on the ship, Alice instructed him to do some things. First, if there were no accidents, Xiao Chen would have to stay on Ashland Island for a month. She would think of a way to cover for him to leave the island the next month. Gong Jie was a little worried. He was not worried that Xiao Chen's identity would be exposed. It was just that there would be no one else on the island for a month. Other than the maids, there would not even be a playmate. Given Xiao Chen's personality, would he be too lonely? Little Chen, on the other hand, did not mind. Even though he might have to be separated from his parents and sister for a month, he was willing to do it in exchange for Yo-Yo's return, even if he had to pay a heavier price than this. The ship docked at the harbor. Lisa stood at the harbor to welcome them. However, when she saw Gong Jie and Xiao Chen behind Alice, her eyes suddenly flashed fiercely. She frowned slightly, obviously sensing that something was amiss. After a moment of surprise, she did not show any suspicion. She only said in a cold tone, "Alice, you're here." In the hurricane headquarters, there was no distinction of seniority. Hence, Lisa had always called Alice by her name. Alice smiled at her. "Is he awake?" "Yes, he's awake. He's reading in the study," Lisa said. Her tone was calm and emotionless, like an emotionless machine. Xiao Chen could not help but look at her again. Chapter 3574. However, Xiao Chen could only lament and didn't reveal his emotions. He followed closely behind Alice, lowered his head, and quietly walked into the castle. Would he be able to see Yo-Yo soon? Xiao Chen suddenly felt extremely excited. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He didn't know how Yo-Yo had changed after not seeing Yo-Yo for more than a year. Had he grown taller? Was he still as skinny as before? Would he recognize him when they met? Xiao Chen clenched his fists tightly, only to feel his palms full of cold sweat. The castle was huge. As Lisa led them all the way, Xiao Chen only felt that there were endless stairs and endless corridors. Finally, after walking for a very long time, Lisa stopped in front of a door and said in a deep voice, "Young master is in his room. You can go in directly." Alice pushed open the door and walked in naturally. Gong Jie followed closely behind. Just as Xiao Chen was about to step in, he inexplicably felt Lisa's gaze on him, as if she was secretly examining him. He followed her gaze and sized her up, only to see that she was coldly sizing him up. That gaze, which seemed to be able to see through his entire body, made Xiao Chen's heart jolt violently. He had an inexplicable suspicion that Lisa might have recognized him. Lisa quickly turned her gaze away and looked out the window, as if the gaze she gave him just now was just a casual glance. Xiao Chen didn't take it to heart. He entered the room and locked the door from the inside. Alice walked into the bedroom and saw the back of a young man lying quietly on the big bed. He lay quietly on the bed with his eyes closed, as if he was still asleep. However, Gong Jie and Xiao Chen, who were standing behind her, couldn't calm down, especially when he saw the young man's extremely familiar yet pale face. Gong Jie's breathing suddenly became erratic. He walked excitedly to the bed and squatted beside it until he recognized that the child in front of him was really Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo, who had disappeared without a trace for more than a year, suddenly felt a burning sensation in his chest. It really was Yo-Yo. Xiao Chen was so excited that his entire body trembled. This voice had only appeared in his dreams for more than a year. Now that he finally saw it in real life, he couldn't even tell if this was reality or a dream. Gong Jie couldn't help but reach out and cup Yo-Yo's little face. However, the moment he touched his face, the young man on the bed suddenly woke up. He suddenly opened his cold eyes, and his pupils contracted. When he recognized the unfamiliar man in front of him, he sat up in shock and coldly swatted his hand away. There was a loud smack. He swatted Gong Jie's hand away expressionlessly and asked coldly, "Who are you?" Gong Jie was about to step forward when Alice immediately stopped him. She said to Yo-Yo, "Young master, these two are the assistants I brought over. He was taking your temperature just now." The young man frowned but didn't say anything. He only glanced at Gong Jie and Xiao Chen cautiously. Xiao Chen saw Yo-Yo's cold and indifferent gaze land on him. He scrutinized him for a long time before he finally looked away coldly. It was obvious that he didn't pay much attention to him. At the same time, this also meant that Yo-Yo had really forgotten about him. Perhaps he didn't feel anything when he was asleep, but when he woke up, Xiao Chen suddenly realized that Yo-Yo had really changed. He had become especially unfamiliar. Chapter 3575. Alice pretended to be normal as she walked over. As usual, she started a series of tests on him, including measuring his blood pressure and temperature. Yo-Yo was very obedient. He allowed her to use all sorts of instruments to measure his body. However, his expression was indifferent, as if it was just a routine. Seeing that he was so calm, Alice couldn't help but ask, "Do you still have palpitations recently?" "Occasionally." He was a man of few words. If he could describe something with one word, he would definitely be stingy. He didn't speak often. Probably, other than him, no one else could live on this isolated island for a few months without breaking down. Humans were social animals. They were used to living in groups and isolated from society. Yo-Yo only had Lisa by his side. However, both of them were quiet and didn't speak often. Occasionally, Lisa would deliberately talk to him, but Yo-Yo would only use a few words to end the conversation. In the past, Yo-Yo was naturally introverted. However, because of Yun Shusha, he was still considered cheerful. However, under hypnosis, the second personality destroyed the first personality. As a result, the second personality completely took over. Today, Yo-Yo was more like a walking corpse. Xiao Chen's heart ached so much that he was about to suffocate. When he thought about how lonely Yo-Yo had been for the past year, he felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. For some reason, he hated Gong Shaoying even more. Gong Jie pulled Xiao Chen behind him and reminded him, "Are you ready? Can you hold on for a month?" Xiao Chen nodded and said firmly, "Uncle, don't worry. It's only a month. I can still hold on." Gong Jie said coldly, "I'm just afraid that when the time comes, you won't be able to think about Mommy and Yu Yao until you cry and snot." Xiao Chen pouted. "Can't I think about them even if I can't see them?" Alice glanced at them and suddenly took out a medicine box. She took out a syringe, opened a medicine bottle, and sucked the medicine into the syringe. According to the plan, she injected Yo-Yo with tranquilizers and sleeping pills in place of the original injection. Then, She disguised him as Xiao Chen and took him away without anyone knowing. Then, he asked Xiao Chen to stay behind to replace Yo-Yo. There were not many people on the island who were close to Yo-Yo, so normally, no one would notice. Even Lisa could not tell the difference between Xiao Chen and Yo-Yo. Alice held Yo-Yo's arm. Just as she was about to inject him, Yo-Yo caught a glimpse of the medicine bottle and was shocked to see the table of elements on the bottle. He immediately pushed her needle away. The syringe fell to the ground with a loud thud, and a few drops of medicine spilled out. Alice stared in shock. Yo-Yo asked coldly, "What medicine is this?" "This is the medicine that I've been injecting you with before." Yo-Yo narrowed his eyes and said mockingly, "The table of elements on the medicine bottle is not what it used to be." He was very observant. In the past, whenever Alice injected him with medicine, he would observe the table of elements on the medicine bottle. Now, the medicine that Alice was about to inject was obviously not the same medicine as before. Moreover, she had brought 2 suspicious people with her this time. In an instant, he became even more vigilant. Yo-Yo suddenly opened his mouth and was about to ask Lisa to come in when Gong Jie rushed over and covered his mouth tightly. He warned, "Don't make a sound." Chapter 3576. Yo-Yo sized him up coldly. He struggled fiercely, trying to break free from Gong Chen's grip. Gong Jie saw that he was struggling fiercely, so he used his hand like a knife and slashed the back of his neck. Yo-Yo's eyelids fluttered, and he fainted on the bed. Alice was dumbfounded. Xiao Chen was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. He ran to the bed and carried Yo-Yo. He opened his eyelids and saw that he had really fainted. He was shocked. "Uncle, you're so cruel. You're so cruel to your own nephew." Gong Jie held his forehead and said with a headache, I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't use too much strength. He won't die. He's just fainted. If you used more strength, Yo-Yo's neck would have been broken, okay?" Xiao Chen said angrily. Gong Jie was as strong as 3 adults, and he still had the cheek to say that he didn't use too much strength. If he used more strength, he would have killed him. Gong Jie cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "It's good that you hit him. Maybe he'll remember who he is." He looked at Alice for confirmation, but she said coldly, "No matter how much you hit him, he won't regain his memory." Gong Jie's lips twitched. Although his heart ached, there was nothing he could do. "I'm worried that he'll spread the news." "Okay, don't make a fuss." When he was young, he often got injured during training. He didn't suffer any injuries that were more serious than this. Xiao Chen carefully touched the back of Yo-Yo's neck. Seeing that there weren't any injuries or fractures, he was relieved. Yo-Yo had fainted. This time, he could finally do whatever he wanted. Little Chen hugged him tightly as if he had found his lost treasure. His eyes reddened uncontrollably. Yo-Yo, Xiao Chen's heart was filled with tenderness when he finally met her after so many times in his dreams. No matter what, he had to bring Yo-Yo home. He never belonged to Hurricane. He belonged to the Mu family. He had a father, a mother, a brother, and a sister who loved him. He shouldn't be Gong Fan. He shouldn't be such a cold-blooded, demon-like war machine. Alice walked over and helped Yo-Yo lie flat on the bed. She helped him dress up, then took off Yo-Yo's clothes for Xiao Chen to change into, while Xiao Chen put on Yo-Yo's clothes. After more than a year, Yo-Yo had also developed a little and grown taller. However, compared to Xiao Chen, he was still very skinny. The clothes on his body looked very empty. After putting the wig on his head, the job was finally done. Xiao Chen, on the other hand, disguised himself as Gong Fan and lay on the bed. Based on his appearance alone, no one would be able to tell that he was a fake. Gong Jie frowned and said with disdain, "Can't you act more realistically?" "How?" "Make your expression cold and your gaze fierce." Xiao Chen immediately put on a straight face. However, Gong Jie was used to seeing his warm smile. Now that he suddenly imitated Yo-Yo's expression and put on a cold face, Gong Jie couldn't get used to it. Alice said, "There aren't many people on this island, so you don't have to force yourself. However, you can't give yourself away when you're facing Lisa. She's in charge of taking care of Yo-Yo for Gong Shaoying. If you give yourself away, it'll be hard for the news to leak. When that happens, It'll be very difficult. Chapter 3577. Xiaochen and Yo-Yo had been swapped. The swapped Yo-Yo was immediately taken away by Gong Jie. When they left, Gong Jie carried him on his back. Lisa stood at the door and saw Gong Jie carrying Yo-Yo. The guy on his shoulder had obviously fainted. She asked symbolically, "What's wrong with him?" "Blood sickness. He had fainted." Lisa didn't probe further with such a careless explanation. She obviously didn't suspect anything either. As an assistant, how could he faint from blood sickness for no reason? That didn't make sense. She let him go easily. Gong Jie couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. He turned around and looked deeply at Alice, only to see her enter the room with a cold expression and close the door. He had a feeling that she knew about this matter. Gong Jie asked Alice, "Have you communicated with Lisa about this?" "No. But I have a feeling that she knows." Gong Jie lowered his voice and said, "I swapped Yo-Yo." Alice furrowed her brows and turned around to take a look. However, she didn't have time to think too much about it. Now's not the time to think about this. Let's get out of here quickly. Gong Jie nodded. After Gong Jie and Alice left with Yo-Yo, Lisa entered the room. Xiaochen was initially at a loss. When he saw her enter, he frowned and pretended to be asleep on the bed. He wanted to bluff his way out of this. Lisa walked to the bedside and saw Xiaochen lying on the bed quietly asleep. She smirked mockingly and kicked him. Xiaochen sat up in shock and said angrily, "Why did you kick me? They're gone. You don't have to pretend anymore." Pretend? Xiaochen's heart skipped a beat, but he refused to admit it. "What do you mean pretend? I don't know what you're talking about. You can understand." Lisa paused and said, "Muichen." When Xiaochen heard this, he abruptly turned his head and stared intently at her. He couldn't believe that Lisa could recognize him so easily. After all, he and Yo-Yo looked exactly the same. At first, even Mu Yaja couldn't tell them apart. Only Yun Shusha could recognize them at first glance. How could Lisa tell at a glance that he wasn't Yo-Yo? She could even tell that he was pretending to be asleep. What a sharp gaze. Lisa pursed her lips coldly, apparently knowing what he was thinking. She said coldly, "I recognized you the moment you got off the boat." Usually, Alice would only come alone. She was not allowed to bring anyone with her. However, today, two strangers had appeared. Even though Gong Jie and Xiaochen were in disguise and no one could recognize them, it didn't mean that she wasn't observant. She used to be Gong Jie's maid, so how could she not recognize him? Xiaochen had the same face as Yo-Yo, so how could she not recognize him? No matter how he disguised himself, it was difficult to change his facial features. She knew very well that they were here to take Yo-Yo away. However, she turned a blind eye and did not stop them. With her ability, she was fully capable of stopping them. However, she didn't. Xiaochen's heart skipped a beat. He was so nervous that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was worried that Lisa would ignore Yo-Yo if she knew about this. Lisa smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll just pretend that I don't know about this. From now on, you're Gong Fan. As long as you play your role well and don't let anyone recognize you, I won't make things difficult for you." Chapter 3578. Why did she do that? Her job was to protect Yo-Yo, but in reality, she was a spy that Gong Shaoying had placed around him to keep an eye on him. This was her job, but she didn't fulfill it. She even let Yo-Yo go on purpose. Why did she do that? There's no reason. Lisa couldn't be bothered to explain further. "I'm guessing that Alice will report to Gong Shaoying that you're unwell. You don't have to go anywhere except here. You just have to stay here quietly. Remember, don't talk too much." After she finished speaking, she turned around and left the room swiftly. Xiao Ichen leaned against the headboard in a daze. For a moment, his mind was in a mess. When Yo-Yo woke up, he was in a high-class cabin. He sat up and realized that he was on a huge bed. Just as he sat up, he heard a man's elegant voice beside him. "You're finally awake." Before Yo-Yo could react, Gong Jie pounced on him. He hugged his head and rubbed his face. "Yo-Yo, Uncle missed you so much." Yo-Yo frowned and instinctively reached out to push him away. So disgusting, so mushy, Yo-Yo said coldly, "Let go of me." However, Gong Jie didn't let go of him. Instead, he cupped his face and planted a kiss on his cheek. "Get lost." Yo-Yo instinctively pushed his face away and distanced himself from him. Immediately, he reached out and rubbed the spot where Gong Jie had kissed him. His eyes were filled with disgust. Who was this man? He actually kissed him. Yo-Yo looked up angrily and glared at Gong Jie. "What are you doing? Kissing my biological nephew." "Biological nephew?" Yo-Yo narrowed his eyes dangerously and asked suspiciously, "Who are you?" Gong Jie said pitifully, "Yo-Yo, don't tell me you don't even recognize your biological uncle." "I'm your uncle, Gong Jie." "Gong Jie." Yo-Yo coldly spat out 3 words, "I don't know you." He wiped the spot where Gong Jie had kissed him. Then, he rubbed his hand on the bedsheet forcefully. Gong Jie was traumatized when he saw this. "Yo, you think I'm dirty?" "Yes. It's dirty," he admitted bluntly in a cold-blooded tone. Gong Jie was speechless. Gong Jie. He really wanted to beat him. In the past, he had never felt that this fellow deserved a beating. Gong Jie inched closer to him and asked angrily, "You really don't recognize me? Should I know you?" Yo. Gong Jie pursed his lips and comforted him. "It's okay if you don't recognize me. Anyway, it's good that you're still alive. Your mommy knows you're still alive. She's waiting for you at home." Mommy. This word actually caused a slight ripple to appear in his ice-cold heart. Even though he quickly regained his deathly stillness, only this word caused him to become slightly absent-minded. In an unfamiliar environment, he was surprisingly calm. He asked, "Where are you taking me?" Although the Gong Jie sitting in front of him had an overbearing aura, Yo-Yo's aura was not suppressed at all. Such a thin body seemed to be brewing an extraordinary aura. It was frightening. He had really changed. Chapter 3579. Looking out of the window, Yu saw the sea. He knew that he was now traveling on the sea, which was no different from a cage on the sea. It was difficult for him to escape, and he was destined to be unable to escape from this man's control. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. Yo lay down on the bed quietly and said coldly, "You don't have to watch over me. I can't escape anyway." Gong Jie widened his eyes in surprise. He was surprised by his calmness. However, he quickly smiled and stood up. "Have a good rest today. You'll go home tomorrow." He left the room after he finished speaking. After the door was closed, Yo closed his eyes and fell asleep. At the same time, in the Mu residence, Yun Shusha was restless. She tossed and turned in bed when she returned to her room. She could not sleep well and felt uneasy. Gong Jie sent her a message saying that he was on his way back with Yo and asked her not to worry. However, she was nervous, agitated, and uneasy. She was worried about Yo, but she was even more worried about Xiao Chen. Would he be lonely on the island alone? Initially, she did not agree to this plan no matter what. Yo was back, but what about Xiao Chen? Was he going to replace Yo and stay on the island forever? She heard that there was nothing on the island except for a huge castle. It was almost isolated from the rest of the world. Wouldn't Xiao Chen feel lonely? Yun Shusha's heart ached when she imagined Xiao Chen being left alone on the island. However, she also felt that it was unfair to Xiao Chen. She also felt that Mu Yaja was heartless. However, Xiao Chen said that he was only going to replace Yo temporarily. It did not mean that he would never return. The most important thing now was to bring Yo back and recover his memory as soon as possible. After that, everything would be easier. If Yo continued to stay on the island, nothing would go smoothly in the future. Yun Shusha reluctantly agreed. Before Xiao Chen left, Yun Shusha hugged him to sleep for the entire night. Xiao Chen hugged her tightly because he was going to be away for a long time. He did not know when he would be back, so it was inevitable that he would miss her. Xiao Chen did not dare to stay any longer. And he left hurriedly as he was afraid that it would make her sad. Now that Yu was already on his way back, she felt inexplicably uneasy. 2 days later, the ship docked. Mu Yaja and Yun Shusha were waiting at the port in advance. When Gong Jie carried Yo off the ship, Yun Shusha saw them from afar. She and Mu Yaja went up to them excitedly. Before they even got close, tears rolled down their cheeks. Yo-Yo looked at the tall and handsome man in the crowd. Her gaze was fixed on him, but she looked away coldly. However, when his gaze fell on Yoon Shusha and he saw her red eyes looking at him with anticipation, he did not know why his heart started to beat erratically. Yo-Yo was inexplicably stunned by his strange reaction. Yoon Shusha walked up to him and held his face. She looked left and right. When she saw that it was really him, she still could not believe it. She wondered if she was dreaming. It wasn't until she caressed his face that she confirmed that this wasn't a dream. Chapter 3580. Yo-Yo frowned and said coldly, "You've got the wrong person." Yoon Shusha's expression froze. Mu Yaja also frowned slightly and exchanged glances with Gong Jie. Gong Jie immediately said, "He doesn't remember anything. His memories have been sealed by hypnosis." Yo-Yo pursed his lips mockingly and looked away impatiently. To him, the so-called memory loss that Gong Jie mentioned was ridiculous. Memory loss? How could he have lost his memory? Who were these people, and why were they saying such strange things? In fact, it could only prove that Alice's hypnosis was too successful. The fake memories that she had created had already infiltrated Yo-Yo's mind. The memories that she had fabricated made Yo-Yo really believe that he had grown up in the Gong family and that he was Gong Fan and not Yo-Yo. Hence, to him, what Gong Jie had said was a complete lie. He would not fall for it so easily. Yoon Shusha was at a loss. The child standing in front of her had the same face as Yo-Yo. Whether it was his exquisite eyes or his handsome features, they were all so familiar. In the past year, he had not appeared in her dreams countless times, but he was out of her reach. However, now that the living Yo-Yo had really returned, he was so unfamiliar. The Yo-Yo who used to pester her and call her dearest mommy seemed like he would never return. Yoon Shusha's heart was filled with disappointment. She was extremely upset as tears fell one after another onto his shoulders. She was heartbroken. Yo-Yo saw her tears and felt annoyed. He turned his face away and did not look at her. To him, whether it was Yoon Shusha, Gong Jie or Mu Yaja, they were all complete strangers. It did not matter. Yoon Shusha said with difficulty, "Yo-Yo, do you really not recognize me? I've said it before." Yo-Yo finally could not take it anymore. He waved her hand away and said coldly, "I've said it before. I'm not Yo-Yo. You've got the wrong person. Don't call me that again." These words were undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Yoon Shusha's heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife. She clenched her fists and held back her tears. At the side, Mu Yaja held her shoulders tightly and comforted her. "Don't rush. Take it slow." "Okay," Yoon Shusha asked carefully. "Yo-Yo." Yo-Yo looked at her coldly and did not say anything, as if he was looking at a stranger. However, Yoon Shusha did not back away. Instead, she reached out and hugged him. His body was cold. His skin was cold as if he was born like this. His palms were cold, not as warm as Xiao Chen's. Yoon Shusha hugged him tightly. Even though Yo-Yo had become so cold when she saw him again, she was already very glad that he was still alive. It was good that he was alive. She had thought that he would never come back. She was already very grateful that her most precious family member had been found after losing him. In the car ride back, Yoon Shusha hugged Yo-Yo. Even though he was obviously resisting, she refused to let go and hugged him tighter and tighter. His body was so cold. She wanted to use her body temperature to warm him up. However, Yo-Yo was extremely uncomfortable. Seeing that he could not break free, he stopped struggling and looked out of the window without looking at her. His cold gaze made her heart palpitate. Chapter 3581. It was the third day since Yo-Yo left. Xiao Chen spent the past 3 days on the island in agony. The nutritious meals, oatmeal, fruits, and all sorts of green vegetables, were all boiled once and tasteless. There was broccoli in every meal, and his eyes were about to turn green from eating. Xiao Chen felt like he was about to turn into a rabbit. Every time he sat at the dining table, he felt like he was being tortured. He ate the tasteless vegetables and felt like a rabbit who had nothing left to live for, gnawing on the broccoli resentfully. The problem was that there were so many vegetables, but where was the meat? There was no meat at all. It was no wonder that Yo-Yo had become so thin after disappearing for more than a year. God, how could he not be thin? According to Alice's explanation, it was necessary to control the intake of protein due to certain drugs. But it couldn't be that there was no protein at all, right? The worst thing was that there was no rice, no rice, no rice. The most tragic thing needed to be emphasized thrice. Xiao Chen's stomach was as big as a cow's, and he ate at least 2 bowls of rice per meal. However, there were only side dishes and no rice. Finally, after countless nutritious meals were served, Xiao Chen's body swayed and he was on the verge of collapsing. He was so hungry that he felt dizzy. Finally, with a plop, he fell head first into the plate of rice. Meat, meat, Xiao Chen had a dream. He felt like he was looking at a huge piece of steak that had arms and legs and was running in front of him. As soon as he saw the meat, his eyes turned red. Drooling, he chased after them madly. Just as he was about to grab the meat, Lisa slapped him and woke him up. When Xiao Chen woke up, he realized that he was in Lisa's arms. He didn't know when, but his saliva had dripped onto her chest. Lisa's face turned green. She said coldly, "You can talk in your sleep." Xiao Chen blinked in shock. He furrowed his brows and asked in confusion, "What did I just say?" "Ru. Ru. Lisa said strangely, "It's a name." Xiao Chen pondered for a moment and scratched his head. I dreamt of a piece of meat running in front of me." Lisa's eyes darkened. What? Did his flesh grow legs? Could his dream be any more absurd? Xiao Chen asked, "Why did I faint?" Lisa said coldly, "Low blood sugar." "Low blood sugar?" Xiao Chen sobbed. "I was healthy when I came here, but I've been starved to the point of hypoglycemia." Lisa rolled her eyes. "Who asked you to eat so much?" "I haven't eaten meat in days. On the way here, because they were on the ship, the food was not very good. Originally, they thought that they would be able to eat to their heart's content, but in the end, what greeted them was green food." He was starving to the point of lovesickness. He really wanted to know how Yo-Yo had survived the past year. If he doesn't eat meat, won't Yo-Yo suffer from hypoglycemia? The medicine that Alice prescribed will help him replenish the effects he needs. It was rare for Lisa to speak so much. She glanced at him in disdain. "Are you awake? Can you get up and walk?" I'm starving to death." Xiao Chen said pitifully, "I want to eat meat." "Do you eat human meat?" Lisa asked. Xiao Chen looked at her in disdain. She was so skinny from head to toe. What was there to eat? Chapter 3582. They looked like 2 small steamed buns. Xiao Chen's face suddenly flushed red. Lisa glanced at him and looked at his expression. She then followed his gaze and it landed on her chest. No matter how stupid she was, she could tell that he was staring at her chest. Lisa's face darkened. Suddenly, she released her grip on Xiao Chen, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground with a loud thud. "Pervert." Lisa scolded him coldly. Stepping over him, she went back to her room. Xiao Chen sat up from the ground and rubbed his butt in pain. Feeling wronged, he said, "What? It hurts." Why wasn't she gentle at all? He saw that she was very respectful and gentle to Yo-Yo. It wasn't fair. Xiao Chen nimbly got up from the ground and chased after Lisa. He muttered behind her, "Why are you so gentle to Yo-Yo but so violent to me?" Lisa rolled her eyes expressionlessly and ignored him. "Hey, since I'm replacing Yo-Yo now, you should treat me as Yo-Yo too. Be gentler." Lisa suddenly stopped in her tracks and turned around calmly. She looked at him meaningfully and said in a mocking tone, "Are you as smart as Yo-Yo? Are you as obedient as Yo-Yo? Yo-Yo isn't as perverted as you." As she said this, she glared coldly at Xiao Chen and said coldly, "Mua Chen, I'm warning you. If you stare at me again." Lisa instinctively covered her chest with her hands and said with an ashen face, "Keep your eyes to yourself. If you keep looking, I'll dig your eyes out." After Lisa finished speaking, she walked away. Xiao Chen watched her leave in shock. He couldn't help but lament, how violent. Even though Xiao Chen was very resistant to green vegetables, he could only pretend to be calm and silently eat grass in order not to expose his identity. After 4 days, Xiao Chen finally couldn't take it anymore. He started a hunger strike and insisted on eating meat. Lisa had no choice but to order the chef to prepare steak in the name of wanting to eat meat. At night, little Chen lay in bed, clutching his growling stomach as he tossed and turned. He was so hungry that he could not fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. The lights suddenly came on. Lisa turned on the lights and walked in with a tray of food. At first, Xiao Chen was sleepy and was about to fall asleep when he suddenly smelled an alluring aroma. He jumped up from the bed like a carp. He sniffed in the direction of the aroma. Lisa walked to the bed with a tray and said expressionlessly, "Get up and eat." Xiao Chen moved closer. When he saw the steak on the plate, his eyes lit up. Meat, meat. Xiao Chen was like a heretic from a cult as he sat upright and devoutly. Lisa picked up the food from the bed and placed the tray in front of him. Like a gust of wind, he devoured the large piece of steak in a matter of minutes. Lisa was dumbfounded. She stared blankly at the knife and fork in his hand, looking as if he still wasn't hungry. She asked eagerly, "Is there more? Are you a pig?" Lisa said angrily, "Even pigs don't eat as much as you." Xiao Chen said pitifully, "I've been hungry for a few days. This bit of meat isn't even enough to fill the gaps between my teeth." Chapter 3583. Half an hour later, Lisa walked in with another tray. Other than steak, there were cheeseburgers, ham, and sugar eggs. Lisa walked into the kitchen and told the chef, "I'm still hungry. Fry another steak for me." The chef stared at her in shock. It was as though she was a mutated monster. Yo-Yo couldn't eat meat, and the nutritious meals were all vegetarian. They couldn't eat any protein or fat, so it would be suspicious if Xiao Chen wanted to eat meat. Hence, Lisa braced herself and said that she wanted to eat. Alas, her appetite was pitifully small and was not even 1/6 of little Chen's. Hence, when she mentioned that she wanted to have another serving of steak, the chefs looked at her as if they had seen a ghost. "Last meal. There's no more," Lisa warned. Xiao Chen nodded like he was pounding garlic. He wolfed down the steak and digested the rest of the food. Only then did he feel a little full. He was so touched that he wanted to cry. Xiao Chen licked the black pepper sauce on his knife and fork, still craving for more. Lisa sized him up coldly. This guy didn't look like an aristocrat at all. Instead, he looked like a starving refugee. "The way you eat isn't elegant at all. Bad review." Xiao Chen's lips twitched. He retorted, "A full man doesn't know the suffering of a starving man. Try starving yourself. How rare. You didn't even know how to do idioms and basic arithmetic in the past. It's been a while, but you've improved." Xiao Chen said indignantly, "Who says I don't know how to do arithmetic? Give me the questions, and I'll show you." Lisa mocked, "Do you think I'm as childish as you? Mph, I don't think you know how to do arithmetic either." Xiao Chen sized her up with contempt. "Do you know how to multiply 10 by 10? Lisa looked at him with even more contempt. She asked, "What's 15 multiplied by 78 and divided by 20? Xiao Chen was speechless. He was dumbfounded. This arithmetic problem wasn't something that could be solved with just fingers. The problem was that even though his arithmetic skills had improved, he still needed to use what Yo-Yo had taught him. He was far from being able to do mental arithmetic. "Can you do it?" 58, 5, idiot. Xiao Chen threw himself onto the bed, feeling wronged. Lisa took the tray away and said disdainfully, "Tell me, why are you and Yo-Yo twins? Why is Yo-Yo so smart and you so stupid?" After saying that, she walked away as light as a feather. Xiao Chen clenched his fists in anger. He glared at her back and gritted his teeth. How infuriating. He was actually despised. "Sleep." Xiao Chen lay on the bed, hugged the blanket, and closed his eyes angrily. However, Lisa's disdainful gaze kept flashing through his mind. "Idiot, idiot, idiot." The demonic voice kept repeating in his ears. Xiao Chen couldn't take it anymore. He sat up and threw the pillow on the floor. "You're the idiot." At the Mu residence, Yun Shusha finished preparing dinner. She walked to the bedroom and gently knocked on the door. "Yo-Yo." There was no response. Yoon Shusha opened the bedroom door and saw Yo-Yo sitting on the bed, expressionlessly looking out the window. She said gently, "It's time for dinner." Yo-Yo didn't move. Even his breathing was so weak that it was almost inaudible. Chapter 3584. Seeing that he didn't respond, Yoon Shusha walked into the room and closed the door slowly. She walked over to him quietly and squatted down in front of him. However, she saw that his eyes were as still as a pool of stagnant water. There was no sign of life. Yoon Shusha's heart ached terribly. She couldn't help but lift her hand, wanting to caress his face. However, Yo-Yo narrowed his eyes and slapped her hand away in disgust. There was a loud slap. The back of her hand was slapped to the side by him. There should be a limit to your wishful thinking. Yo-Yo glanced at her coldly. Wherever his gaze landed, it was as if frost had struck. Yoon Shusha could only feel that pair of cold eyes landing on her face. Every inch of her skin was about to be frozen into ice. Every time she saw his cold expression, Yoon Shusha's heart felt like it was being stabbed. How did he become like this? Yoon Shusha bit her lip hard as tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Because of his heartless words, her heart was extremely broken. "Why are you crying?" Yo-Yo said in annoyance. "You only know how to cry. Even if you want to cry, don't do it in front of me. It's an eyesore." As he said this, he stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. His voice was emotionless as he said, "It's time to stop acting." Yoon Shusha's heart ached as she said, "Yo-Yo, I don't know why you've become like this. But, I'm your mommy." Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo closed his eyes. Finally, he turned around impatiently and said coldly, "Don't call me by that damn name again." Damn it. When Yoon Shusha heard this, she felt as if she had been hit hard. It was undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Yo-Yo, that was his name. He had said before that no matter what, he would never change his name or his surname. His surname was Yoon, and his name was Tianyu. His surname was Yoon, and his name was Yo-Yo. This was the name his mommy had given him, and he cherished it very much. But now, Yo-Yo was coldly saying that it was a damn name. Yoon Shusha felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. "Yaya," outside the door, a childish voice suddenly sounded. Yoon Shusha looked up and saw that the door was suddenly opened from the outside. Mu Yaja was standing at the door, holding the pink little Yuyaro in his arms. Gong Jie said softly beside him. Yuyaro kept calling for her brother. Mu Yaja walked in with Yuyaro in his arms. When the little Yuyaro saw Yoon Shusha, she immediately opened her arms and babbled, asking for a hug. Yoon Shusha took Yuyaro from Mu Yaja's arms. She gently held her little hand and kissed her forehead. She said to her, "Yes, brother is back. Brother is back." Yuyaro followed her gaze and looked at the figure by the bed. Her gaze suddenly froze. "Brother. Brother," her young and tender voice was filled with childishness. It was clear and melodious like a wind chime, tinkling and extremely pleasing to the ear. Yo-Yo looked back and saw the little fellow in Yoon Shusha's arms. Her skin was as white as snow, and her eyes were big and watery. Her eyelashes were long and curly. Even though she was only 2 years old, her eyebrows were already beginning to take shape. Her facial features were actually somewhat similar to his. He couldn't help but be stunned. Yuyaro suddenly stretched out her little hand, raised a finger, and pointed at him. She looked up at Yoon Shusha and opened her little mouth. "Brother. Brother." Yoon Shusha's eyes couldn't help but sting. She immediately said, Yes, it's brother. It's brother." She still remembered. Chapter 3585. When Yuyaro saw Yoon Shusha's affirmation, she felt greatly encouraged. She was so excited that she babbled and struggled to get down. Yoon Shusha squatted down and placed her on the ground. Yuyaro took a step forward and suddenly lost her balance. She fell hard on the ground. However, she didn't seem to feel pain. She clumsily stuck out her butt and got up from the ground. She opened her small hands and walked unsteadily towards Yo-Yo. She was wearing the squeaky shoes that Mu Yaja had bought. When she walked, every step she took would make a squeaking sound and shine. In the beginning, Yuyaro didn't like to walk. She kept pestering Yoon Shusha to carry her. After Yoon Shusha was done carrying her, she would let Xiao Ichen carry her, followed by her daddy. When they went out, they would always carry her in their arms. Even when she was old enough to walk, she didn't like to jump around on the ground. She was extremely quiet. Hence, Muyaja bought many pairs of such shoes. The little girl found it extremely novel. Every time she took a step, she would squeak. Hence, she started to walk more diligently. Even though she wasn't walking very smoothly, it was considered very smooth. Little Yuyaro walked to Yo-Yo's side. Seeing that she was about to trip, she hugged Yo-Yo's leg tightly and sat on the ground. She hugged Yo-Yo like a lazy koala bear. She looked up and smiled foolishly at him. This smile was as if all 3,000 worlds were shining brightly. When she smiled, her two front teeth were as cute as a rabbit's. She was mischievous and cute. Yuyaro squeaked, "Brother, brother." She spoke fluently and clearly. Yo-Yo understood her immediately. He turned his face away awkwardly and didn't look at her. Seeing that Yo-Yo was ignoring her, Yuyaro couldn't help but feel aggrieved. She tugged at Yo-Yo's trousers with her two little hands. She even wanted to climb up Yo-Yo's trousers. She really looked like a koala bear. Just as Yunshusha revealed a gratified smile, she saw Yo-Yo take a step back and avoid Yuyaro. Yuyaro lost her balance and fell to the ground. She sat up and instantly felt unhappy. Her entire little face scrunched up as if she had suffered a great grievance. "Brother," she felt so aggrieved that 2 silver beads appeared at the corners of her eyes. She pursed her lips but held it in. When Yunshusha saw this, she immediately walked over and wanted to carry Yuyaro. However, Yuyaro pushed her away. Even though she was only 2 years old, she had inherited Muyaja's stubbornness and aloofness. She stubbornly refused to be carried by Yunshusha. She stood up again and staggered towards Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo widened his eyes in surprise. However, he saw that she had already walked in front of him and was hugging him like a koala bear. Her eyes were full of attachment. "Brother," Yuyaro held back her tears stubbornly and refused to let go. She wanted him to carry her. Yo-Yo remained unmoved, but his eyes were flickering fiercely. He turned his face away and didn't look at her anymore. After a long silence, he said word by word, "I'm not your brother." Yuyaro widened her eyes. Obviously, she didn't understand what he said. However, when she saw his resolute expression, she couldn't hold back her aggrieved emotions any longer. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Boo-hoo! Yuyaro hugged his leg and cried pitifully. Chapter 3586. You used to like her a lot. You kept hugging her and teaching her how to call you brother. Now that she's learned it, you're ignoring her when she calls you that. Yuyaro pouted pitifully. She cried as she said, "Brother is ignoring her. Brother is ignoring her." Yo-Yo turned around expressionlessly and said coldly, "I'm not interested in playing house with you. So, get lost." Yo-Yo turned around coldly and sat back on the bed like an ice sculpture. Yunshusha carried Yuyaro, sighed, and left. The door closed softly. Yo-Yo looked back slightly and glanced at the door. His eyes were cold, but there was a flash of absent-mindedness in the depths of his eyes. Yueyao's teary eyes appeared in his mind and his thoughts became even more chaotic. He fell on the bed, covered himself with the blanket, and closed his eyes. Outside the door, Muyaja and Gongjie looked at Yunshusha's disappointed and gloomy face. They looked at each other. Gongjie said, "Shusha, don't worry. Yo-Yo didn't mean what he said. He doesn't remember you, and he doesn't remember Yuyaro either. It's understandable that he treats you as an enemy." Muyaja agreed with Gongjie and said comfortingly, "Take it slow." "What if," Yunshusha said worriedly, "what if he can't remember me for the rest of his life?" "Don't be so pessimistic." Gongjie said with a headache, "Compared to Yo-Yo, I'm more worried about you." He was worried that she would be disappointed, despaired, upset, and unable to recover from this setback. Yunshusha shook her head and said calmly, "No, I won't. I will become stronger. At this time, Yo-Yo needs me more. Shoujie, don't worry." She smiled at him. Gongjie took Yuyaro from her arms. Seeing that she was still sulking with tears hanging from the corners of her eyes, he kissed the corner of her eyes and coaxed, "Yuyaro, don't cry. Uncle will carry you." "Uncle." Yuyaro threw herself into his arms and wrapped her arms around his neck. Gongjie was overjoyed. It was rare for Yuyao to be so close to him. She took the initiative to wrap her arms around his neck. He couldn't help but kiss her again and again. He couldn't bear to part with her. Mu Yaja said coldly, "If you like it so much, give birth to one yourself." Gong Jie snorted. "No, I love Yuyao the most." As he spoke, he subconsciously shielded her, worried that Mu Yaja would snatch Yuyao from his arms. When Yun Shusha saw these two clowns, her mood finally recovered a little. It was as if sunlight had shone into her heart. It didn't matter. It didn't matter that Yo-Yo didn't remember her. She would try her best to make him remember her. It was late at night. Yo-Yo lay in bed. Even though he hadn't eaten for a day, he didn't feel hungry. He always carried the medicine that Alice had concocted with him. To a certain extent, these medicines would make him feel full and replenish his various bodily functions. He looked at the ceiling. There was no emotion in his cold eyes. Suddenly, footsteps came from outside the door. Following that, there was a long silence. It seemed that the person hesitated for a long time. Finally, she took the doorknob and pushed the door open. In the darkness, the footsteps slowly walked in. Yo-Yo's handsome brows were slightly raised. He closed his eyes but didn't close them tightly. Through the gaps of his eyes, he saw a slender figure slowly walk to his bedside and sit on the edge of the bed quietly. Yo-Yo. A fair hand slowly caressed his cheek and tucked his hair behind his ear. Chapter 3587. Yo-Yo did not say a word and pretended to be asleep. Yun Shusha looked at him quietly. She could not wait to make up for the yearning she had for him over the past year through this one look. This one look felt like 10,000 years. She could not help but recall how he looked when he was just born. His wrinkled little face was red. After being rescued and returned to the incubator, he looked so weak that it was as if he would leave her at any time. She had just gone through childbirth, but she still insisted on visiting him every hour with Yun Yecheng's help. In the beginning, she was weak, but later on, she slowly regained some vitality. Her two small hands began to wave and grasp the air. Her legs also began to kick. The first time she took him out of the incubator to feed him, he was born prematurely at 8 months. He was so small that he was as light as a feather. She still remembered the first time he opened his eyes. Those jet-black eyes were like inlaid agates, filled with a lively luster. He opened his eyes and smiled at her, revealing his pink gums. The first time he said "Mommy" was inadvertently when she was busy tripping rice noodles for him. The little guy was playing with his toys when he suddenly said, "Mommy." She turned around in surprise and walked up to him. She asked him to say it again, but he only cared about his toys and smiled at her foolishly. He did not say it again. However, Yun Shusha was still so excited that she could not calm herself down. God knew how long she had been waiting for this sentence. Every time she taught him how to pronounce it, she would exaggeratedly open her mouth and he would be amused by her. Gradually, he grew up and became more mischievous. However, at this time, his body was still weak and he often had to go to the hospital. Thus, throughout the year, the empty ward had become his permanent base. She remembered one time when he was very active and rolled down from the hospital bed. She was so shocked that she rushed over and picked him up. He cried out loud in pain. He rarely cried. Even when he was injected, he was so stubborn that he did not shed a single tear. This fall, however, he cried and hugged her tightly. She coaxed him for a while before he finally stopped crying. He grabbed her clothes and quietly fell asleep. It wasn't until he was 5 years old that his physical condition gradually stabilized. She liked to take him to the park for a walk. Every time she came back at noon, he would obediently prepare lunch and wait for her to come and have lunch together. He didn't know how to cook from the very beginning. At first, when he learned how to cook, the fried rice turned into a black paste. She was so angry that she scolded him and told him not to go into the kitchen without permission. It wasn't because the food he made wasn't delicious, but she was worried that he would cut his hand with a knife at such a young age. What if he accidentally caught fire? She didn't dare imagine what would happen. However, Yo-Yo's talent in cooking seemed to be innate. As time passed, the food she cooked became more and more delicious. From Chinese food, to Western food, to Japanese food, to Italian food, it was all very easy for him. She was touched, but her heart ached at the same time. Even if the Yu who knew how to dote on mommy, the Yu who knew how to do housework, the Yu who knew how to cook, the Yu who knew how to do housework, the Yu who knew how to cook, and the Yu who was very, very capable never came back, it's fine. Chapter 3588. Yoon Shusha hugged his shoulders and her tears fell uncontrollably onto his face. Whether you remember it or not, you'll always be mommy's yo-yo. Mommy really misses you. Really, really misses you. It's mommy's fault. Mommy didn't protect you well. No matter how harsh or heartless you are, mommy won't blame you. But, don't leave mommy again. Boiling hot tears continuously dripped onto his cheeks and rolled down his cheeks endlessly. She held his face in her hands and gently kissed his forehead. Her tears fell straight onto his eyelashes, slid through his eyes, and trickled down from the corners of his eyes. Yo-Yo could only feel his vision becoming blurry. Her tears seemed to flow from her eyes and into his heart. His heart tightened and convulsed inexplicably. He felt as if he was going to suffocate and turn the world upside down. Why was she crying? Don't cry. Her tears made his heart feel like it was going to explode. Why did her tears cause him to lose control of himself? Hearing her sobbing, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, as if it was going to pierce through his heart. What was going on? What exactly was going on? Yo-Yo suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. His heart was in a mess and he couldn't help but frown. When he came back to his senses, he felt Yoon Shusha's body stiffen. He then realized that his arms had unknowingly wrapped around her shoulders. It was as if he had lost control and hugged her uncontrollably. Yo-Yo was so shocked that he pushed her away and sat up on the bed. Although he tried to hide it, he couldn't hide the embarrassment that he was showing at this moment. Yoon Shusha came back to her senses and stared at him in disbelief. Yo-Yo's breathing quickened. He stared at her warily and leaned his back against the bed. He said coldly, "Are you done crying?" Yoon Shusha was stunned. His change was so sudden that she was not mentally prepared. When he hugged her just now, she really thought that Yo-Yo was back. However, it was just a moment of joy before everything returned to normal. Yo-Yo said coldly, "You don't have to show such an expression." He turned his head and looked out the window, deliberately not looking at her lamenting expression. "Yo-Yo, do you know why I call you Yo-Yo?" Yoon Shusha said, "When you were born prematurely and almost died. I'm glad that God's blessing. You are the best gift to me. That's why I named you Yoon Tianyu." Ha! How interesting. I'll say this one last time, my name is Gong Fan, not Yoon Tianyu. As he said that, his head was suddenly felt. He was in pain. The pain. Yo. She asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Do you have a headache?" She rushed out of the door in a hurry, found the medicine box, and rummaged through it. Finally, she found the painkillers. Carrying a glass of water, she walked into the room and passed it to him. "This is a painkiller. Take it, and your head won't hurt anymore. Enough." Yo had a splitting headache and was extremely irritated. The berserk factor in his body was fermenting. He flung her hand away. "Go away." Chapter 3589. The sudden movement caused the two of them to freeze. Yo stared at the shattered glass on the floor, feeling inexplicably frustrated. Yoon Shusha lowered her head and stared at the shattered glass. For a moment, she couldn't figure out whether it was the glass that had shattered or her heart. Yoon Shusha pursed her lips as tears rolled down her cheeks. Suddenly, she knelt down on one knee and picked up the shattered glass pieces. "Mommy, in the future, let's use the same glass as a family of 4, okay?" She could still remember how Yo had excitedly brought 5 glasses to Yuyao not long after she was born. 3 of the glasses had adorable suns on them while the other 2 had beautiful moons on them. Yo had said that his daddy, Xiao Chen, and he were the suns that protected the moons and gave them warmth. The moons were bright because of the suns. Gong Jie even threw a tantrum at one point, displeased that none of the 5 cups belonged to him. However, Yo had muttered, "You're a married uncle, and you're a spilled bucket of water. It's not yours." He had carefully placed the 5 glasses on the rack and marked them separately. Her tears continued to drip onto the carpet, staining it. She picked up the shattered glass pieces bit by bit until her gaze fell on the suns. Suddenly, Her fingertips started to tremble uncontrollably. In a moment of carelessness, she accidentally cut her fingertips. A drop of blood appeared on the wound. However, she didn't feel the pain at all. She held the shattered glass pieces in her hands as her sad tears fell silently. When Yo-Yo saw this, especially when he saw Yunshusha's tear-stained face, he couldn't help but grip the bedsheets tightly. The bedsheets were crumpled into a ball, just like his inner world at that moment. "Stop picking them up." Little did he know that the moment he finished speaking, Yunshusha's tears fell even more violently and she started to sob. Yo-Yo frowned again. He felt a headache coming on when he heard her crying. He held his forehead and looked helplessly at Yunshusha, who was squatting by the bed and holding back her tears. He didn't know what to do with her. In fact, you already knew why Alice came to the island. You also recognized Gong Jie and me. The sea breeze on the island blew gently. Xiao Chen put on a jacket and sat on the beach. The bright moon seemed to be half submerged in the sea, but it also seemed to be rising from the sea. It was a beautiful sight. Lisa stood beside him and looked at the moon that seemed to be immersed in the sea. It was as if the sea water was the tears of the moon that had gathered to form the sea. She didn't say anything. She sat down beside Xiao Chen and gazed at the distant horizon. Her lips twitched as she said, "I work for young Master Jie. How could I not recognize him?" Xiao Chen turned to look at her in surprise. "So, you did it on purpose?" "On purpose?" Lisa smiled. "What do you mean on purpose? You knew that Yo-Yo and I were swapped, but you still allowed Gong Jie to take Yo-Yo away." Lisa didn't say anything, but it was a silent admission. "Why?" Xiao Chen didn't understand. "Isn't your mission and duty to take care of Yo-Yo? If he was taken away, it means that you didn't fulfill your duty. Aren't you worried that Gong Shaoying will hold you accountable?" Lisa didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "Do you know what faith is?" Chapter 3590. What do you believe in? Xiao Chen asked. Lisa looked at the moon and narrowed her eyes. She said mockingly, "Belief? I don't have any." Ever since she could remember, her family had been destroyed and her family had died. She and hundreds of other war orphans like her had been brought to Atlanta Island. On Atlanta Island, there was a fearsome assassin organization. Every year, they would recruit war orphans or refugees of different skin colors, ages, and genders from all over the world. Hundreds of children were locked up in a huge cage. They were only given a bowl of rice and a glass of water. Hundreds of children were only given a bowl of rice and a glass of water. Every child was hungry. What did this mean? This meant that even if they wanted to eat a mouthful of rice, they would have to face hundreds of children fighting each other. If they were hungry, they would only be given a bowl of rice. If they were thirsty, they would have a glass of water. In order to fill their stomachs and survive, the children would start to fight each other. Some were born weak and unwilling to fight. In the end, they could only starve to death. Most of the children would fight with their lives. Everyone wanted to live. No one was an exception. She was the same. At that time, her belief was that she did not want to go hungry. In the beginning, she was unable to recover from the setback. She was weak and could not compete with the children who formed cliques. However, hunger was like a beast. Once hungry, the primitive hunting instinct in her body would be fully activated. She started to fight and snatch. Gradually, from a mouthful of water to a mouthful of rice, until she could snatch half a bowl of rice and half a glass of water. Gradually, many children starved to death. Corpses were constantly being dragged away from the cage. However, the other children did not dare to leave the cage. They were like livestock in captivity. Later, a bowl of rice became half a bowl of rice, and a glass of water became half a glass of water. Eventually, they stopped eating and drinking. At that time, many children had already gone crazy. They were all brought from war-torn lands. Some were even natives. They did not have the concept of law and did not have the principle of killing or not killing. They only wanted to live. When they were hungry and uncomfortable, they wanted to eat. When there was no food, even if they gnawed the flesh of a living person, they would still devour it. Children who were unwilling to eat became living prey. At this time, it was necessary to resist those children who formed cliques. In the end, Lisa and the other children survived, but at that time, all the children were on the verge of death. She was not surprised. The moment she crawled out of the rope, she naively thought, was she finally free? The belief then was to live in this warm sunshine. However, after the children were brought out, they were immediately sent to the next round of devil training. The so-called devil training was hellish. The weak would die, and the strong would survive. Perhaps, in the end, there would only be one person who could survive all the trials. Lisa was the only child who survived during that period. However, after the cruel competition, she didn't even have a basic belief. It was precisely because he had no faith that his heart ached for Yo-Yo. After the first personality was destroyed by the second personality, it became Gongfan's Yo-Yo. It was like a numb and cruel zombie. It had no feelings, no beliefs, and no goals. Empty ambition. Chapter 3591. When she had first met Yo-Yo, this child was so special. On one hand, he was ruthless and unscrupulous. On the other hand, he was as warm as ever, just like the bright and beautiful sun shining on one's heart. However, this warmth was only vividly displayed in front of Yunshusha. At that time, Yo-Yo was loved, knew how to love and enjoy being loved. He was blissful. Now, Yo-Yo was sitting there, but he was as empty as a painting. He was still as if there was no trace of life in him. She knew very well that Yo-Yo was not happy at all. Therefore, she had deliberately let Yo-Yo go. At least, when Yo-Yo was brought back to the Mu family, there would be people who would love and protect him. They would not bear to use him. Now, her belief was that her little master would be able to smile from the bottom of his heart like he did in the past. Xiaochen took a deep look at Lisa. It was as if something in his heart had been deeply touched. Yunshusha hugged the broken shards. Her tears kept falling onto the carpet and her lips were trembling. She did not even notice that the shards had cut her palms and blood was seeping out. Yo-Yo casually switched on the wall lamp and saw the tears on her face clearly. At that moment, he did not know what to do. In the past, he had never felt so helpless. Now that he was faced with such a sad woman, it was as if there was an invisible hand mercilessly tearing his heart into pieces. He suddenly blurted out, "All right. Don't cry." However, Yunshusha was unmoved. When she thought of the 5 cups that Yo-Yo had bought and one of them was missing, she was so sad that tears kept falling. "Don't cry." Yo-Yo threw the table lamp on the floor in frustration. He did not know how to stop her tears, let alone how to comfort her. He only knew that when he saw her tears, his heart would also hurt. When he saw her sad, he would also feel very sad. Yunshusha looked up and saw Yo-Yo's impatient expression. She then stood up and left with the shards in her arms. Not long after, she came back in again. Wearing gloves and a vacuum cleaner, she cleaned up all the shards on the carpet. You should sleep early." After Yunshusha finished speaking, she awkwardly wiped her tears and left the room. Yo-Yo looked in the direction of the closed door. She could not help but feel a little dazed. He lay down on the bed, but he could no longer fall asleep. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. No matter what, it was difficult for him to fall asleep. He suddenly sat up and got off the bed. He opened the door and walked to the living room. This was the first time he walked out of his room since he returned to the Mu family. On the table in the living room, there were a few pieces of paper towels. On the paper towels, there were a few pieces that formed a sun. Yunshusha couldn't bear to throw it away, so she pieced the pieces together. Yo-Yo glanced at it and his heart seemed to be in turmoil. He turned around and looked around. Suddenly, he saw a few white blankets on the cupboard beside the table. He frowned and walked over as if he was possessed by gods and demons. Yo-Yo took the quilts and walked into the room. He sat in front of the study table and casually opened the drawer. There were a few boxes of paints in the drawer. He squeezed the paints into the palette, picked up a pen and dipped it in the paints. Then, he slowly drew a circle on the surface of the empty cup. Yo-Yo suddenly realized that he was doing something childish. He frowned and put the cup on the table with a look of disgust. He turned around and was about to go to bed. Chapter 3592. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall Yunshusha's misty, teary eyes. His heart was in a mess. Yo-Yo looked at the cup on the table and hesitated. Finally, he sat back down. The next day, Yoon Shusha walked to the room door and knocked gently, but there was no response. She pushed the door open and walked in. She saw Yo-Yo wrapped in the blanket on the bed, still sleeping. She walked to the bedside quietly. She was worried that she would wake him up, so her footsteps were light and slow. As she walked past the study table, her gaze was attracted by a cup on the table. Yoon Shusha followed his gaze. She remembered that this cup was used to serve guests. Why was it placed here? She casually picked up the cup, but from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of the neatly packed paints and brushes, as well as the unwashed color palette. She couldn't help but be startled, and slowly turned the cup over. On the other side, there was an exquisite simple drawing on the white surface of the cup. There was a small sun drawn on the cup. Although the strokes were simple, the drawing was exquisite. It was exactly the same as the sun on the cup that Yo-Yo had bought previously. Yoon Shusha's heart skipped a beat. This was drawn by Yo-Yo? It was unbelievable. Yoon Shusha looked at the bed. Yo-Yo was still sleeping. He was curled up under the blanket and sleeping soundly. Her gaze fell on the cup again. The sun on the cup had been drawn for a long time and the paint had dried up. She felt warmth in her heart, as if the sun was shining on her. This was drawn by Yo-Yo. Could it be that he had drawn a new cup because he had accidentally broken the cup yesterday? Yoon Shusha was extremely touched at this thought. She held the cup lovingly. She left the room with the cup in her arms. In the living room, Mu-Yaja was cleaning up the table. When he woke up in the morning, he saw the broken cup on the table. Yoon Shusha pieced the sun together. He knew in his heart that Yo-Yo must have upset him again last night. Yoon Shusha had always treated this cup like a treasure. During that period of time, she had always held this cup. This cup had accompanied her through the most torturous period of her life. However, now that it was broken, it was natural for her to be upset. For the entire morning, she was in low spirits and her eyes were swollen. It was obvious that she had cried a lot last night. When Yoon Shusha walked into the living room with a cup drawn by Yo-Yo, she raised the cup in front of Mu-Yaja as if she was presenting a treasure. She smiled and said, "Look, this was drawn by Yo-Yo." Mu-Yaja couldn't help but be surprised. He took the cup from her hand. Yoon Shusha was still worried as she reminded him, "Be careful. Don't drop it." "It won't drop." Mu-Yaja comforted her. His gaze fell on the cup, but he smiled and said, "One look and I can tell that it was drawn by that little thing. Do you think that Yo-Yo drew this cup because he saw me sad? So, that's probably it. Although he has lost his memories, there are some feelings in his bones that can't be cut off." Mu-Yaja comforted her and said, "Don't worry and don't be too anxious. Take it slow. His memories will slowly recover." Yoon Shusha was also encouraged. She nodded vigorously as hope ignited in her heart. Initially, she had thought that there was no hope for Yo-Yo to recover his memories. Chapter 3593. On the fourth day of Yo-Yo's return to the Mu family, he finally started to eat. Yoon Shusha personally cooked a bowl of noodles. She wasn't a good cook, but in the past year or so when Yo-Yo wasn't around, she started to study her culinary skills. She started from recipes and attended some culinary training classes. Gradually, she was able to take charge of the kitchen. She brought the bowl of noodles into the room. Yo-Yo was sitting on the bed, flipping through the books on the bookshelf. When he saw her walk in, he put the books back into the bookshelf with an indifferent look on his face. Yoon Shusha smiled and placed the bowl of noodles on the table. She said to him, "Yo-Yo, eat something. If you don't eat, you'll starve." When Yo-Yo heard this, he turned his face away. However, his attitude was no longer as repulsive as before. Instead, he said indifferently, "I don't want to eat. You haven't eaten for 4 days." Yoon Shusha pleaded, "Eat something, okay? Mommy will feed you." She paused for a moment. Worried that he would resist, she changed the way she addressed him. "I'll feed you." Yo-Yo sat in front of the study table and looked at her steadily. He didn't reject her, but he didn't agree either. Yoon Shusha walked over to him tentatively. She moved a chair over and sat in front of him. With one hand, She used a fork to roll up the noodles and put it in his mouth. Yo-Yo looked at her expressionlessly. Suddenly, he opened his small mouth. Yoon Shusha was overjoyed when she saw this. However, she didn't dare to show her happiness on her face. She suppressed her excitement and fed him. It wasn't until he swallowed the mouthful of noodles that she believed that he was willing to eat. If he was willing to eat, it was a huge breakthrough. She couldn't help but feel touched. She persuaded him again, "Eat another mouthful, okay?" Yo-Yo still felt awkward and didn't say anything. He just stared at the noodles in her hand. The noodles she cooked weren't that amazing, but perhaps he was really hungry. He actually felt that this bowl of noodles was very fragrant. Yoon Shusha tried to feed him another mouthful of noodles, and he obediently opened his mouth and took another mouthful. When she saw it, she was so moved that she wanted to cry. The fact that he could eat was something she had never thought of. She even thought that if he was still unwilling to eat, she would really be at her wit's end. At that time, she would have no choice but to forcibly inject him with a nutrient solution. Now that he was willing to eat, Yoon Shusha was greatly gratified. After what happened last night, the little fellow was no longer so resistant. The little guy finished the bowl full of noodles. Yoon Shusha tried to feed him a few mouthfuls of soup, and Yo-Yo drank it obediently. As long as she fed him, he would no longer refuse. When Yoon Shusha walked out of the room with the empty bowl, Gong Jie came over. When he saw the empty bowl, he was a little suspicious. "Is he willing to eat?" Yoon Shusha nodded agitatedly. "Yes." This bowl of noodles was all eaten by him. "Oh my God!" Gong Jie widened his eyes in disbelief. "He's finally willing to eat. It's just that his attitude towards me is still so cold." When he opened his mouth to eat the noodles, she even suspected that he had finally regained his memory. However, when she took the bowl of noodles and left the room, his back was still facing her coldly. He didn't even look at her once. She then realized that if he had really regained his memory, Yo-Yo wouldn't treat her so coldly. Chapter 3594. At night, when Yoon Shusha finished cooking the noodles, Gong Jie volunteered to bring it into the room. Yoon Shusha was a little hesitant, but Gong Jie said coquettishly, "Shusha, let me, as your uncle, perform a little." "All right." Gong Jie took the bowl of noodles from her hands. Yoon Shusha cautioned him carefully, "Be careful, it's hot." Hence, Gong Jie carried the bowl of noodles into the room. However, within a few minutes, the sound of porcelain shattering could be heard from the room. Yoon Shusha and Mu Yaja heard the commotion and stood up in shock. They rushed into the room, only to see Gong Jie standing at the side with a stunned expression. Yo-Yo was sitting on the bed, and the floor was littered with broken bowls and soup. It was a complete mess. Gong Jie turned his head innocently and glanced at Yoon Shusha bitterly. He mouthed, "Yo-Yo is so fierce." It turned out that when he carried the bowl of noodles into the room, Yo-Yo heard the door open and thought that it was Yoon Shusha. He sat up on the bed and saw that it was Gong Jie. When he carried the bowl of noodles in front of him and was about to feed him, Yo-Yo waved his hand coldly and knocked the bowl of noodles out of his hand onto the floor. After Yoon Shusha cleaned up the mess on the floor, the three of them left the room. Gong Jie looked sad and lonely. "Why did he knock over your bowl of noodles?" Yoon Shusha found it unbelievable. "What did you say?" Gong Jie said sadly, "I just brought it in and didn't say anything, but he knocked over my bowl of noodles." As he said this, he crossed his arms and said angrily, "That's too much." "How could it be?" Mu Yaja said, "Maybe it's because you're not likable as an uncle." Gong Jie was speechless. He was speechless. He said provocatively, "Brother-in-law, that means you're very confident. That kid must have knocked over the bowl of noodles that you brought in." Mu Yaja said confidently, "How is that possible?" "That is my son." Gong Jie said, "Try it then." "I'll give it a try then." Mu Yaja cooked the noodles and brought them in. Gong Jie stood at the door and started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. Before he could count to 1, the sound of porcelain being overturned came from the room again. Gong Jie and Yoon Shusha walked in and saw Mu Yaja standing beside the bed with an ashen face. The floor was also in a mess. Yu sat on the bed with an unapproachable posture. His face was as cold as ever. Poochie. Gong Jie covered his mouth and held back his laughter. He had a smug expression on his face that said, "I was right, wasn't I?" Mu Yaja glared at him. Gong Jie glared back at him indignantly. Yun Shusha immediately said to Gong Jie, "Go out first." "Sister, I go out." Gong Jie left the room feeling wronged. Yun Shusha then said to Mu Yaja, "You go out too." Mu Yaja looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he left the room. Yun Shusha cleaned up the mess on the floor, cooked another bowl of noodles, and brought it into the room. In fact, she was feeling a little nervous. In the afternoon, Yo-Yo was willing to eat. Perhaps he was really starving. She didn't know if there would be a second time. Yun Shusha carefully inched closer to the bedside. Yu, who was leaning against the headboard, stared at her expressionlessly with a cold look on his face. She probed, "Eat something, okay?" Yo-Yo didn't say a word and just looked at her silently. Chapter 3595. The noodles have just been cooked and are still warm. As she said this, she lifted a mouthful of noodles and cautiously brought it to his mouth. Yo-Yo's gaze fell on the bowl of noodles and he suddenly raised his hand. Yun Shusha thought that he was going to knock the bowl over and instinctively retracted her hand. However, she saw him suddenly straighten the bowl of noodles. It turned out that her bowl of noodles was tilted to one side and was about to spill out. Yun Shusha's anxious heart then calmed down a little. However, she saw that Yo-Yo obediently ate a mouthful of noodles and didn't show any signs of resistance. She was so excited that her hands were trembling. She had never expected that Yo-Yo would really accept her. If it weren't for Mu Yaja and Gong Jie, she would have thought that Yo-Yo was only eating because he was hungry. However, when Gong Jie and Mu Yaja came in, Yo-Yo had knocked over the bowls in their hands. However, when she fed him, he didn't show any signs of resistance. Instead, he obediently ate a mouthful of noodles. Had he accepted her from the bottom of his heart? Yun Shusha was greatly encouraged. Even though he still didn't say anything and still looked cold, he didn't even look at her. However, his willingness to eat what she fed him made Yun Shusha's originally gloomy heart gradually brighten up. Halfway through the noodles, he lowered his head and refused to eat anymore. Yun Shusha persuaded again, "Yo-Yo, eat another mouthful. If you only eat this little, you'll be hungry at night." Yo-Yo looked at her deeply. After a long time, he finally relented and ate another mouthful. When he finished the noodles, Yun Shusha asked him if he wanted some soup. He shook his head. However, she looked very surprised. Wouldn't he choke if he only ate noodles? However, she was already very touched when he finished the noodles, so she didn't ask for more. When she was about to clear the bowl, she asked, "Is it good?" Initially, she thought that he would remain silent like before. However, Yo-Yo suddenly opened his mouth and said coldly, "It tastes awful." Yun Shusha was shocked. She picked up the bowl and drank a mouthful of soup. It was so salty that she frowned. So salty. How could he eat it? Yun Shusha felt a little guilty. It took a lot of willpower for him to finish all the noodles that tasted so bad. She could not help but laugh. She looked at Yo-Yo and said in embarrassment, "It's so disgusting. It must have been hard on you." Yo-Yo looked at her and smiled. She was stunned. When she smiled, she was very beautiful and charming. Especially, it made him feel an inexplicable warmth. It was like the most difficult sunlight in winter. His cold and stiff lips couldn't help but relax a little. However, when Yun Shusha looked at him again, he resumed his cold expression. He looked away and didn't want to look at her again. When Yun Shusha walked out with the bowl of noodles, Mu Yaja and Gong Jie gathered around. When they saw that there was only soup left in the bowl, they were so shocked that they couldn't close their mouth. "He ate it all?" "Yeah." Gong Jie immediately said unhappily, "That's not fair. Why did this fellow knock over our bowls when brother-in-law and I brought the noodles in?" Mu Yaja couldn't hold it in anymore. He glared at him and said, "Shut up." Gong Jie said, "That's the truth." Mu Yaja changed the topic. In any case, it's a good thing that he's willing to eat, no matter who feeds him. Yun Shusha nodded. There were tears in her eyes. She immediately wiped them away with her fingers and smiled. This meant that Yo-Yo had started to accept her. This was indeed an amazing breakthrough. Chapter 3596. She felt warm inside. She had accidentally spilled a lot of salt when she was cooking the noodles. Even so, he still finished all the noodles. As she thought of this, she felt both guilty and warm at the same time. Yoon Shusha carried the new clothes into the room. Yo-Yo was already lying down. When he saw her enter, he turned around and looked at her warily. He slowly sat up on the bed. Yoon Shusha smiled and said, "Let me help you bathe, okay?" Yo-Yo narrowed his eyes and frowned, but he still didn't say a word. Since he didn't say anything, Yoon Shusha took it as a silent agreement. She walked to the bed and reached out to carry him. However, Yo-Yo shrunk his shoulders and tried to avoid her. Yoon Shusha picked him up at once. They hadn't seen each other for more than a year. He had grown taller and heavier than before. Carrying him was starting to take some effort. Yo-Yo instinctively wrapped his arms around her neck and looked angry. "What are you doing?" "I'm carrying you to the bathroom." Yoon Shusha pretended to sniff his body and said teasingly, "How many days has it been since you last bathed? Don't you feel that you stink?" Yo-Yo's face turned strangely red. Yoon Shusha continued, "I remember that you have a serious obsession with cleanliness. You'll go crazy if you don't bathe for a day. Now, you don't care about cleanliness that much." Yo-Yo flew into a rage out of humiliation. He glared at her and said, "Shut up. Let go." Yoon Shusha became bolder. She didn't let go of him and carried him to the bathroom. The bathtub was already filled with water. Yoon Shusha placed Yo-Yo on the floor. She squatted in front of him and reached out to take off his clothes. However, Yo-Yo turned his back to her and held his shirt tightly, not allowing her to touch him. Yoon Shusha didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was this guy being shy? Perhaps, after growing up, some men and women began to have different thought. In the past, Yo-Yo loved it when mommy bathed you. Why are you so shy now? Yoon Shusha held back her laughter and turned his body around, only to see that he had a death grip on her collar, preventing her from unbuttoning his shirt. After holding it in for a while, he squeezed out 3 words, "Get out." "What? Are you shy?" Yoon Shusha teased, "Which part of your body haven't I seen before?" As she spoke, she began to unbutton his shirt. Yo-Yo was so frightened that she took a few steps back until she was forced into a corner. With no way out, she widened her eyes in shock and warned again, "Don't touch me." Her shocked and angry expression was like that of an innocent woman who had been violated. That can't be, right? She used to bathe him too. However, at that time, in order to train him to be independent, she had always let him wash by himself. Yo-Yo had even been a little reluctant. Later, when Muyaja bathed him, he had complained that Muyaja wasn't gentle at all and always hurt him. Yoon Shusha was amused. Even though Yo-Yo had struggled, she still unbuttoned his shirt without a word. Yo-Yo couldn't resist at all. He allowed her to take off his clothes and carry him into the bathtub. He curled up in a corner, his whole body submerged in the water, only half of his face above the water. His vigilant eyes were on her, full of resistance. He didn't want her to bathe him. He didn't like to be touched by the opposite sex. Yoon Shusha knew that he was shy. As she smiled, she squeezed the shower gel into the shower gel, grabbed one of his arms and started to scrub it carefully. The moment she touched him, Yo-Yo's body instantly froze like a rock and he didn't move at all. Chapter 3597. The bathroom was foggy. Gradually, Yo-Yo relaxed. His muscles were no longer as tense as before. He allowed Yoon Shusha to rub the foam on his body. Her technique was very gentle and light. As the foam rubbed on his body, his muscles and bones relaxed involuntarily. Yoon Shusha then applied shampoo on his hair. She was very careful and did not let any of the foam into his eyes. Yo-Yo could not help but fall into a daze for a long time because of her gentle technique. After the shower, Yoon Shusha carried Yo-Yo onto the absorbent mat. Then, she wrapped the large bathrobe around him and wiped his body. Yo-Yo remained silent. However, he did not show any strong resistance. He was slowly accepting her. When she thought of this, Yoon Shusha's heart was filled with warmth. She firmly believed that his memories would be erased. However, some blood ties could not be erased no matter what. She believed that Yo-Yo would definitely recover. Yoon Shusha carried Yo-Yo into the room. However, she was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, she took out a thick stack of fairy tale books from the bedside table. In the past, Yo-Yo loved it when she read him bedtime stories. When he was not around, these fairy tale books were secretly kept by Xiao Chen. Yoon Shusha thought that these books had been thrown away. She was sad for a long time. Then, she went to the bookstore and bought many more fairy tale books. She placed them on the bedside table in Yo-Yo's room. Every time a new fairy tale book was released, she would buy all of them. Yo-Yo looked at the fairy tale books in her hands strangely. His gaze was filled with doubt. You don't remember? In the past, you loved it when Mommy read you fairy tales. Yoon Shusha flipped to a page. The first story was Andersen's fairy tale, The Daughter of the Sea. Her fingertips gently ran over the words. For a moment, she was filled with emotions. This was also the first fairy tale that she read for Yo-Yo. At that time, Yo-Yo was still young. She didn't really understand the story. After she read it a few more times, she finally understood that it was a tragic story. Yo-Yo lay down on the bed, and Yoon Shusha tucked him in. Daughter of the Sea. Have you heard of it? Yo-Yo blinked but did not say anything. Yoon Shusha said again, you must not remember. I'll read it again, okay? Yo-Yo slowly closed her eyes. Yoon Shusha held the book and began to read softly. In the depths of the vast ocean, there is a kingdom of fish. The Sea King had 6 beautiful daughters, especially the youngest, who was even more beautiful than her sisters. She was kind, pure, and had a beautiful voice. They lived freely and without worries in the sea. Sometimes, their grandmother would tell them some novel stories on the sea. This filled the youngest's heart with longing for the world at sea. As Yoon Shusha read, memories of the past surfaced in her mind. It was as if she could see a 3-year-old Yo-Yo hugging a pillow and sitting on the bed, looking at her longingly. Mommy, do these fish look the same as humans? No, they have the bodies of humans, but the tails of fish. Then how do they breathe in the sea? Yoon Shusha was suddenly put in a difficult position. She immediately said, they are the spirits of the sea. They can swim and breathe freely in the sea. Chapter 3598. That's why, once they reach the sea, they can't walk anymore. Are there really mermaids in this world? Yoon Shusha pretended to be mysterious. Who knows? I'll continue. The little princess finally reached the age of 15 and was allowed to float to the surface of the sea. She looked around excitedly, wanting to take in everything. At this moment, a large ship sailed by her side. There were many people dressed in gorgeous clothes on the ship celebrating the prince's birthday. The little mermaid was immediately attracted to the handsome prince. At this moment, there was a sudden storm and the waves destroyed the ship. The people fell into the water and sank to the bottom of the sea. The mermaid risked her life and rushed into the whirlpool to save the prince. She gently kissed the prince's forehead and hid in the water, silently waiting for someone to save him. At this moment, a young lady found the prince. She called some people and saved the prince. When the story reached the part where the little mermaid wanted to turn her fishtail into legs, she found a witch and drank a magic potion. However, it was extremely painful to turn into human legs. Every step she took, she had to endure great pain. Yo-Yo's heart clenched. He hugged Yoon Shusha's arm and said sadly, "Will the little mermaid die?" She smiled. "No, I won't." "That's good." Yo-Yo was relieved again. The story continued. The witch told him that if the prince forgot his parents because of love and married the little mermaid, she would obtain an immortal soul. However, if the prince married another lady, the little mermaid would die the morning before the wedding and turn into foam in the sea. The little mermaid's face was pale, but she was not afraid. As a reward, the witch cut off her tongue and took away her beautiful voice. She could no longer speak. Late at night, the little mermaid left her family and left heartbroken. When she came to the sea, she drank the potion but fainted because of the pain. When she woke up, the prince asked her questions. She could not answer because she was mute. However, she endured the pain and danced for the prince. When Yo-Yo heard this, he frowned and looked very distressed. As the story went on, Yo-Yo stopped talking. especially when she heard that the prince didn't know that it was the Little Mermaid who saved her. He wanted to marry the princess and invited the Little Mermaid to dance for them. On the night before the wedding, the sisters floated to the surface of the sea. It turned out that in order to save their sister, they cut off their hair and gave them a sharp knife. As long as the Little Mermaid pierced the prince's chest, she could return to the sea. This was his last chance. His memories overlapped with the scene before him. Yoon Shusha looked at Yo-Yo, who was lying on the bed. Everything had changed. He lay on the bed with his eyes closed, but no one knew if he was asleep or awake. Yoon Shusha gently stroked his forehead, closed the book, and was about to leave. When she got up, Little Bun suddenly opened his eyes and asked coldly, "Did she kill that prince?" Yoon Shusha was stunned and turned around. Under the moonlight, Yo-Yo slowly sat up from the bed. Her cold eyes revealed a hint of curiosity. Did she use that knife to kill that prince? Yoon Shusha shook her head. No. Yo-Yo said doubtfully, if she didn't kill that prince, she would have turned into foam. Chapter 3599. Yoon Shusha returned to the bedside and caressed his cheek gently. At night, she came to the prince's room and gave him a kiss. As she spoke, she bent down and kissed Yo-Yo gently on his forehead. Yo-Yo was stunned and his eyes widened in shock. She didn't kill the prince because she didn't have her tail and couldn't return to the sea. At the prince's wedding, she endured the pain and danced. In the end, she turned into foam and disappeared forever. Yo-Yo asked, "Why? Why didn't she kill the prince? This prince is ungrateful." It was the Little Mermaid who saved him. He seemed to be filled with righteous indignation. When Yoon Shusha heard this, she suddenly laughed. Yo-Yo had already immersed himself in this story and his emotions. Just like in the past, when he heard this story, Yo-Yo clenched his fists and asked sadly, "If it were me, I would definitely kill the prince and return to the sea to be with my family. Because the Little Mermaid loves the prince very much. Even if she had to sacrifice herself, she wouldn't be willing to hurt the prince." Yo-Yo sneered. "If it were me, I wouldn't sacrifice myself for someone who doesn't love me." Yoon Shusha was frightened by his cold gaze. The Yo-Yo of the past would not have such a cold gaze when he heard this story. This was a pair of eyes that were filled with hostility. There was a murderous aura that the Yo-Yo of the past would not have. Yoon Shusha hugged him tightly, feeling uneasy. "Yo-Yo, don't be like this." Yo-Yo was hugged by her warm embrace. For a moment, his heart calmed down. Not everything can be solved by killing. Yoon Shusha said again, "You weren't like this in the past." Yo-Yo suddenly pushed her away and said expressionlessly, "In this world, the weak are prey to the strong. Only by becoming strong enough can one's own interests not be infringed upon." Yoon Shusha was stunned. She suddenly remembered what Yo-Yo had said to her in the past. Only by becoming stronger can you protect the people you want to protect. "Mommy, I want to protect you, so I must become strong. That way, no one can hurt you." "Yo-Yo, why do you want to become stronger now?" Yo-Yo could not help but stare blankly. This question stumped him. That was right. What was he doing now? What was the purpose of him becoming so powerful? Yo-Yo's gaze suddenly fell on her hand. In the past, Yo-Yo wanted to become stronger because he wanted to protect Yoon Shusha. But now, he had lost his goal and didn't know where to go. He said in a daze, "Only by being strong can one not be reduced to being dominated by others." Yes. In this world, the weak were prey to the strong. She didn't deny that. To become strong, one had to be built on the pain of the weak. She also couldn't deny that. However, if the strong became apathetic, cold, and heartless, then what was the meaning of life for such a strong person? "I'm tired." Yo-Yo turned away and did not look at her. "I want to sleep." Yoon Shusha furrowed her brows and did not say anything more until he lay down. She covered him with the blanket and left quietly. However, lying on the bed, Yo-Yo tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. When he said that he was tired and wanted to sleep, it was just an excuse. Chapter 3600. It was a mess for no reason. Her embrace was very warm and made him yearn for it. He actually couldn't help but want to hug her back tightly. It was just that this warmth made him feel at a loss, lost, and confused. Why did he rely on this warmth? She kept telling him how he used to be and how he used to be. But was there really a past? Yo-Yo suddenly felt a splitting headache. It was so painful, as if a pair of hands were tearing his head apart. Yo-Yo clutched his head in pain and his body curled up involuntarily. He was drenched in cold sweat. It was only at dawn that his headache eased a little. He wrapped himself in the blanket tiredly and fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already the afternoon of the next day. He slowly pushed open the door and saw Yun Shusha sitting on the sofa in the living room. She was humming softly as she knitted a small glove. On the floor, Yuyaro was sitting on the blanket, hugging a teething stick and chewing on it. When she heard footsteps coming out of the room, Yuyaro looked up. She was the first to notice Yo-Yo. Seeing him standing at the door, she immediately got up from the floor with her butt sticking out. She gripped the teething stick tightly and walked towards him step by step. "Brother," she hobbled over to him. She loosened her grip and the teething stick fell to the floor. Yun Shusha heard the sound of something falling. She looked up and looked at Yo-Yo. She put the glove aside and said, "Yo-Yo, you're awake?" Yo-Yo didn't say a word. He only lowered his head and looked at Yuyaro. Yuyaro had a pair of big eyes just like him. They were very attractive. Especially those curly eyelashes. When she blinked, they fluttered like the wings of a butterfly and were very charming. Yuyaro suddenly opened her arms. Her cherry lips opened and closed and she said in a soft and tender voice, "Brother, hug." This glutinous rice ball wanted brother to hug her. The little fellow was very forgetful. She had completely forgotten about Yo-Yo's indifference towards her when she was asking for a hug. Yun Shusha froze for a moment and looked nervously at Yo-Yo. However, she saw that his attitude was no longer as cold as before. At least, when Yuyaro walked towards him, he no longer dodged. "Big brother. Hug me." Yuyaro stretched out her arms again and stood on her tiptoes. However, she lost her balance and fell on her butt. From start to finish, Yo-Yo looked at her coldly and did not help her up. Yuyaro fell, but she did not cry in a delicate manner. She only furrowed her delicate brows, clearly aggrieved. She got up from the ground on all fours and raised her head to look at Yuyu, only to see that he was still cold and indifferent. For a moment, she was extremely sad. Her little mouth pouted high, and she looked like a storm was coming. Yun Shusha knew from this that she was going to cry. She quickly stood up and was about to walk over to carry Yuyaro when Yo-Yo suddenly bent down and gently carried Yuyaro. He was still a little unfamiliar with the way he carried his sister. He didn't even know how to use his arms to support her butt. Yuyaro was delighted to see him carry her. She hugged him tightly like a koala bear and didn't want to let go. She leaned on his shoulder affectionately and broke into a smile. Chapter 3601. For some reason, Yuyaro was inexplicably close to Yo-Yo. This surprised Yun Shusha a little. After all, a child's memory was limited. Even before this, Yo-Yo was the closest to her and doted on her the most. She liked to hug her every day, hold her phone, and take pictures of Yuyaro non-stop like an idiot. However, at that time, Yuyaro was incomparably cold to Yo-Yo. However, Yo-Yo had left for more than a year. Yuyaro shouldn't have remembered. Yuyaro hugged Yo-Yo like a koala. Her little head rested on Yo-Yo's shoulder, looking extremely satisfied. Yun Shusha teased her and said, "Yuyaro, where's Xiaochen?" She thought that Yuyaro had mistaken Yo-Yo for Xiaochen. When Yuyaro finally started babbling, Xiaochen taught her to say her name. Yuyaro also learned a skill, which was to recognize the names of all the family members except for Yo-Yo. When Yun Shusha asked, "Where's Xiaochen?" Yuyaro would often point at Xiaochen and ask, "Where's Muyaja?" She could also recognize the direction and point at Muyaja. Yun Shusha didn't specially teach her Yo-Yo's name. This name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. Whether it was Muyaja or Gongjie, they would avoid it as much as possible. Hence, Yuyaro didn't know Yo-Yo's name. However, Yo-Yo and Xiaochen looked very similar, so they might have been confused. "Where's Xiaochen?" When Yuyaro heard Yun Shusha say Xiaochen's name, he couldn't help but look around. However, he didn't see Xiaochen, so he asked hesitantly, "Where's Xiaochen?" Yun Shusha was stunned. If Yu Yaro mistook Yo-Yo for Xiao Chen, she would definitely point at Yo-Yo. However, it did not. Yun Shusha would never have thought that after more than a year, Yu Yaro actually remembered Yo-Yo's appearance and could even differentiate Yo-Yo from Xiao Chen. When Yo-Yo heard Yun Shusha's question, he asked suspiciously, "Who's Xiao Chen?" Yun Shusha said gently, "Xiao Chen is your older brother. You're twins and look exactly the same. No one can tell the difference. Other than your family members, I didn't expect Yu Yaro to be able to differentiate between you and Xiao Chen." After a pause, Yun Shusha said sadly, "After all, when Yu Yaro was not even a year old, you got into trouble." When Yo-Yo heard this, his thoughts were a little confused. "I have an older brother?" Yo-Yo looked a little surprised. Yun Shusha immediately took out a photo. It was a family photo and she showed it to Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo looked at the photo. It was a family photo. Yun Shusha was sitting with Yu Yaro in her arms. Two children who looked exactly like him were standing on both sides. It was sunset. Of the two children, one had a gentle smile while the other had a sunny smile. Their eyebrows and eyes were exactly the same, except for a slight difference in height. Even he could not tell which child was his own. This was the first time he saw a family photo like this after he returned to the Mu family. At first glance, it was a huge shock. Yun Shusha had always said that he was her son and her baby. Yo-Yo had always been suspicious. The reason why he was not so resistant and close to her now was not because he believed that he was her son. It was because he did not know why he was not so resistant and close to her. However, when he saw this photo, Yo-Yo could not help but wonder if what she said was true. Was he really her family? Was that possible? Chapter 3602. Alice had instilled memories in him. He was the son of the Gong family and had always been in poor health, so he had been receiving physiotherapy on Ashland Island. He didn't know who his mother was, nor did he know who his siblings were. He only knew that he had an uncle called Gong Jie. However, even Gong Jie told him that his real name was not Mu Yaja. His real name was Yun Tianyu, and he was the son of Mu Yaja and Yun Shusha. He could not digest this information for a while. It was complete nonsense. He had been in the Gong family all this time and did not have any memories of Mu Yaja, Yun Shusha, and even Xiao Chen. It was just that the photo made his thoughts chaotic for a moment. Yo-Yo lowered his head to look at Yu Yaro, who was in his arms. Yu Yaro also looked up at him. Seeing him staring at him, the little guy reached out his soft hands and gently patted his face. It was so fun. Yo-Yo did not find it annoying, though. Her scratches did not hurt much, and her nails were neatly trimmed. Hence, when she pinched herself, it did not hurt or itch. Yo-Yo was no longer as resistant to this child as before. He avoided her as if she were a snake or a scorpion. This change made Yun Shusha feel relieved. Did he quickly improve on the day he regained his memories? During dinner, Yun Shusha personally cooked. When Gong Jie and Mu Yaja returned, the dishes were already on the table. What surprised them was not that Yun Shusha cooked for the first time, but that they saw Yo-Yo sitting at the dining table with Yu Yaro sitting on the baby stool and playing with a toy. He lazily propped his chin on his hand and quietly watched her play with the toy. This guy actually walked out of his room. This was a miracle. After returning to the Mu family for such a long time, he had always locked himself in his room. He never came out of his room, never letting the sun out. Why did he come out now? Gong Jie and Mu Yaja looked at each other but did not show too much of a shock, lest they startled him. As usual, they sat down at the dining table. Yo-Yo did not look at them and continued to stare at Yu Yaro. Gong Jie had his own thoughts. Yo-Yo, this damn siscon. Why was he always staring at Yu Yaro? Was uncle not good looking? After being back for so many days, this brat had only glanced at him lightly when he smashed the bowl of noodles that he had brought out. He had not even looked at him directly. Gong's heart. Mu Yaja and Gong Jie stared at Yo-Yo fiercely and complained in their hearts. The two of them were not as good looking as Yu Yaro, right? Yun Shusha walked out with rice and saw that Gong Jie and Mu Yaja had returned. The two of them sat opposite Yo-Yo and the three of them formed a strange triangle. Her lips twitched as she placed the rice on the table. Let's eat. Yoon Shusha placed the rice noodles in front of Yu Yao and tied a napkin around her before sitting down beside her. They started eating. Yo-Yo was stunned and did not move his chopsticks. When they were on Ashland Island, he had always eaten alone. He was used to having a quiet dining table and had never experienced this before. There were so many people sitting around the table and eating, but he did not feel uncomfortable at all. "What are you waiting for?" Yoon Shusha picked up a grilled chicken wing for him and said, "Eat it while it's hot." Yo-Yo picked up his chopsticks and started eating. Chapter 3603. Yu finally raised his eyes to look at him. It was just that this glance was cold and emotionless, and then, he pushed the vegetables away in disgust. He pushed them away. He had thought that he would just push them away, but unexpectedly, Yo-Yo picked up the vegetables and threw them into the small plate used for throwing the bones. Gong Jie's heart shattered with a smack. Mu Yaja muttered, "Yo-Yo doesn't like vegetables." Hence, he also picked up a drumstick and put it in his bowl. Yo-Yo didn't even look at it. He used his chopsticks and placed the drumstick on the table. Then, he used his chopsticks to pick up the chicken wing that Yoon Shusha had given him and started eating. Mu Yaja was speechless. Gong Jie tried to hold back his laughter until his stomach hurt. He lowered his voice and said, "Brother-in-law, he doesn't want to eat the drumstick you gave him. Yo-Yo just doesn't like you, haha." Mu Yaja turned around and smiled at him elegantly. Then, he picked up a piece of red braised pork and stuffed it into his mouth. "Shut up and eat." Gong Jie couldn't speak with a piece of red braised pork stuffed into his mouth. He stared blankly at Mu Yaja as he calmly picked up his bowl and started eating. Yo-Yo finished the drumstick in his bowl and stopped eating. Yoon Shusha saw this and picked up some vegetables for him. Yo-Yo hesitated for a while and ate the vegetables as well. Yu Yao thought that it was fun. She suddenly scooped up some rice noodles with a spoon. She raised her little hand and stretched it in front of Yo-Yo, wanting to feed him. Yu Yao wasn't very good at using the spoon. She held the spoon in a reverse grip and the rice noodles dripped onto the table. Yo-Yo looked at her in surprise, only to hear Yu Yao mumble, "Okay. Eat." "Da." Yoon Shusha said, "Yu Yao is feeding you." Yo-Yo was stunned for a few seconds. She stretched out her head and took the rice noodles that Yu Yao handed her. The sticky rice noodles didn't have any extra seasoning. It was light, but there was a rich milky fragrance. Yo-Yo took a bite. When Yu Yao saw this, he was extremely excited. He danced around and scooped up another bite. His little hand held the spoon with great effort and raised it to his mouth. Yo-Yo was a little conflicted. This rice noodle was not particularly delicious. It was a formula for babies, so it was tasteless. However, Yu Yao insisted on feeding him. He didn't know if it was because he found it fun or something else. Yo-Yo had no choice but to take another bite. Yu Yao turned his head and smiled at Yoon Shusha as if he was presenting a treasure. He revealed his cute little front teeth and said, "Mommy, brother is eating." Yoon Shusha smiled and coaxed, "Okay. Yu Yao, eat too." "No, I want to feed." "Brother." As Yu Yao spoke, she fed Yo-Yo mouthful by mouthful. After that, Yo-Yo was full just by eating the rice noodles. Yoon Shusha was holding back her laughter. She was a little surprised that Yo-Yo didn't show any resistance to Yu Yao's closeness. Even when Yu Yao fed him, Yo-Yo didn't reject it. Opposite them, the two men who had been ignored from the start to the end were frowning. Gong Jie didn't believe it and picked up another wing root. Yo-Yo didn't even look at it and removed it. There was nothing to say. Gong Jie couldn't take it anymore and protested, "What's the difference between the wing root I picked up and the one your mommy picked up?" "This was the love of an uncle." Yo-Yo said coldly, "It's dirty. There's saliva. It's not hygienic." Gong Jie was puzzled. Didn't Yoon Shusha's chopsticks have saliva on them? Yu Yao's spoon was full of saliva. Why didn't he dislike it? Chapter 3604. After dinner, Yo-Yo was about to go back to his room when Gong Jie suddenly put his arm around his shoulder and said, "What are you doing in your room every day?" "Cultivating." Yo-Yo slapped his hand away and glared at him as if to warn him, "Don't touch me." "Why are you glaring at me?" Gong Jie said confidently, "I'm doing this for your own good. If you weren't my biological nephew, I wouldn't have anything to do with you lying in your room until your limbs degenerate. Yoon Shusha added, that's right, Yo-Yo. You can't stay in your room every day. You have to go out for a walk once in a while. When Mu Yaja heard this, he suddenly said to Yoon Shusha, why don't we take him out for a walk? Who knows, it might be good for him to recover his memory. Yoon Shusha felt that this made sense. Gong Jie also said, I heard that there's an open-air music festival at Manha Square tonight. It starts at 8 p.m. Why don't we go to the music festival? Yoon Shusha agreed readily. Gong Jie was about to carry Yu Yaro when Yoon Shusha immediately said, Yu Yaro can't go. It's too noisy at an open-air music festival. Yu Yaro will cry. Then, what about Yu Yaro? Although there was a nanny, Yu Yaro couldn't be left alone. No one was assured. Mu Yaja said matter-of-factly, as his uncle, you should stay and take care of Yu Yaro. When Gong Jie heard this, he couldn't take it anymore. No way. Why should I? He hooked his arm around Mu Yaja's shoulder and said disdainfully, don't think I don't know what you're thinking. You must be thinking of using the music festival to communicate with Yo-Yo. No way, I want to go too. What's wrong with the three of us communicating? Hey, are you being xenophobic? Gong Jie was not convinced and said, I also want to communicate with my nephew. Mu Yaja said coldly, your surname is Gong, not Mu. You and I are not family. Gong Jie, Yoon Shusha added, Shou Jie, you can stay at home and take care of Yu Yaro. Mu Yaja continued, well, you don't like Yu Yaro very much. Now, no one is fighting with you for a hug. Be good. After that, Mu Yaja picked up Yo-Yo and left with Yoon Shusha. Gong Jie was left standing alone in the living room, unable to express his bitterness. He didn't know if he should curse her or not. Was he being treated as a babysitter? Just as Gong Jie was about to explode, Yu Yaro suddenly walked to his side, squatted down, and secretly stuffed a toy into his trousers. Ha ha ha. Yu Yaro let out a string of bell-like laughter. She grabbed his trousers and tugged. Gong Jie lowered his head and saw that she was having fun playing with his trousers. His eyes couldn't help but soften. He immediately squatted down and pulled her into his arms. Yu Yaro, Uncle will accompany you at home, okay? Yu Yaro suddenly raised her chubby little paw and slapped his face. Gong Jie's face darkened. He grabbed her little paw and said, you're not allowed to hit Uncle's face. Yu Yaro slapped his face again. Gong Jie frowned unhappily. However, when he saw Yueyao's heartless smile, which made him want to dote on her, he suddenly gave in. He curved his lips and gently kissed her cheek. Yu Yao, be good. Daddy and Mommy don't want you, but Uncle wants you. Yu Yaro suddenly pinched his cheek and pulled it until it was deformed. She was amused by his distorted handsome face and couldn't stop laughing. It was only half an hour's drive from Manha Square. Chapter 3605. Yo-Yo let her hug him obediently. He looked out of the window. The passing scenery seemed familiar. Was this the place where he used to live? Especially when they passed by the park and the bridge across the river. Yoon Shusha saw that he was staring at the bridge and immediately said, Yo-Yo, do you still remember? We used to set off fireworks here during the Lunar New Year. Fireworks? Yeah. Yoon Shusha continued, at that time, you were fighting to set off fireworks. I didn't let you do it in the past, so you felt that it was a novelty and wanted to light your own fireworks. I was a little scared. Yo-Yo stared at the bridge curiously. Through the window, he could see many people standing under the bridge, sitting on long benches or flying kites. The kites were luminous and many of them were bobbing in the wind. He couldn't help but be entranced by the sight. Mu Yaja steered the kite as he looked at Yo-Yo through the rearview mirror. His heart was filled with emotions. Yo-Yo had disappeared for a year and everyone was thinking about him. Although no one gave up easily, as time passed, the hope in their hearts gradually disappeared without a trace. However, no one dared to give up. Because if they gave up, it would mean that in their hearts, Yo-Yo was really dead. At that time, the search became their motivation to persevere. When Yo-Yo really came back, Mu Yaja didn't show it on his face, but in fact, he was ecstatic. His son was still alive. He had come back alive. However, as a father, he had to maintain his composure. Hence, he didn't show it on his face. However, his care and patience for Yo-Yo was no less than Yunshusha's. Even if Yo-Yo didn't acknowledge him and didn't remember him, it didn't matter. Yo-Yo would always be Muyaja's son. This was a fact that even the heavens couldn't change. Many people gathered in Manhur Square. The weather was perfect for the open-air music festival. There was no rain. Everyone gathered in the square. At a glance, the square was filled with people. Among the crowd, there were people constantly waving their light sticks, forming a sea of stars. There were too many people, probably in the tens of thousands. With so many people, it was too dangerous. If there was any commotion, a stampede could easily occur. Yunshusha was a little worried. She had always had a lot of concerns. After all, women were more meticulous. Moreover, there were many reports on the news that said that in crowded places, if it wasn't a stampede, it was a crush, or it was a fall and bruise. With so many people around, it was inevitable. Therefore, she hugged Yo-Yo even tighter. "Why are there so many people?" Yunshusha muttered and looked around. They had arrived relatively early, but because they arrived early, the crowd had blocked the only exit. For a moment, they could not advance or retreat. People kept pushing and shoving, trying to get to the front, the closest place to the stage. There were too many people. If she had known that there would be so many people, Yunshusha wouldn't have come. However, since she was already here, she might as well make the best of it. Yunshusha hugged Yo-Yo. Even so, it was still difficult for Yo-Yo to see the stage. However, he wasn't interested. He didn't like places with too many people, and he didn't like places that were too noisy. It was irritating. It was tiring. Chapter 3606. Yunshusha, however, said, "No, it's too dangerous. There are so many people squeezing around. If you accidentally fall, you might hit your head." Muyaja felt that it made sense. Hence, he took Yo-Yo from Yunshusha's arms, worried that she would be too tired to carry him. Yo-Yo was initially a little resistant in his arms and struggled a little. Muyaja said to him, "You're so heavy. Mommy's arms will get tired if I carry you all the time. Let Daddy carry you for a while, okay?" When Yo-Yo heard this, he didn't show any signs of resistance. He just turned his face away and refused to look at him. Obviously, he didn't appreciate it. However, he didn't refuse or resist again. Muyaja was already satisfied. On the stage, the band went on stage one after another to perform the songs. The atmosphere was instantly ignited. Everyone waved the light sticks in their hands and immersed themselves in the moving music. Yo-Yo was tone-deaf and wasn't particularly interested in music. However, when the third song started playing, it was an English song that strangely captured his attention. "Iminharekani Bodisim, I'm here. Can anyone see Mekanani body help? Can anyone help me? Iminhira prisionero of history, I'm here. A sinner of history, Kantio Uharimikal. Can you hear me yelling? Eriowing to Jetmano, will you take me away immediately? I've been waiting for you to rescueim, you must come and save me. Iminhira Kalingout Buchukantha, I'm here." I'm shouting loudly, but no one can hear Mekanani body help. Can anyone help me? I'm hysterical until I break down. I'm lost in the cage. Tell me there's still hope. Is there anyone outside listening? This was an English song. The meaning of the lyrics was about a lost person, trapped in the sad memories of the past, waiting to be redeemed and saved. However, this song actually made Yo-Yo feel an indescribable sadness in his heart. He gently closed his eyes. In the darkness, he could vaguely see a cage in the darkness where there was no light. A child who looked exactly like him was holding on to the cage tightly and shouting something. But he couldn't hear anything. He couldn't hear anything at all. In his ears, there was only the sound of music and the noise of people buzzing. The youth in the cage seemed to have seen him. He shook the iron bars and shouted crazily, "Let me out of here." Yo-Yo furrowed his brows and was a little puzzled. "Who are you? Let me out. I don't want to be here." The youth gripped the iron bars tightly and looked desperate. "I don't want to be here alone, don't lock me up here alone." Between the iron bars, the youth's delicate face was pale. "Mommy, Daddy, can you hear me? Mommy. Yo-Yo, Yo-Yo." A series of urgent calls finally woke him up. When he woke up again, he was in Muyaja's arms. He seemed to have fainted. Muyaja and Yunshusha were scared out of their wits. They kept patting his face until he finally woke up. However, when he opened his eyes, a line of tears suddenly fell from the corner of his eyes. Yunshusha was shocked to see his tears. Just as she was about to caress his face, she saw a helpless look on the child's face. "Mommy, Mommy," he called her anxiously and frowned slightly. Chapter 3607. Yunshusha was so excited and happy that he had taken the initiative to call her. For a moment, she was caught off guard. Just as she was about to hug him, the child in her arms suddenly pounced on her and hugged her tightly. His little hands hugged her tighter and tighter. "Mommy, Mommy. Yo-Yo missed you so much." Muyaja was also stunned. Yunshusha was also stunned. That familiar voice was enough to make her heart burn. Yunshusha hugged him even tighter in surprise. "Yo-Yo, you're back? Is that you? Yo-Yo?" Gong Jie had told her about Yo-Yo's situation. Yo-Yo had dual personalities. One was the son of light, and the other was the son of darkness. One side was pure and innocent, while the other side was evil and cruel. Gong Jie said that Yo-Yo's memory had been sealed, but his first personality had been killed by his second personality. Perhaps his memory could be recovered, but the innocent and kind Yo-Yo of the past might not be able to come back. When Yunshusha first heard about this, she was shocked and flustered. She didn't know anything about dual personalities, nor did she know anything about the dark side. Her Yo-Yo was so pure and innocent. How could he be so cruel and cruel? But after that, she kept reading up on all kinds of information about dissociative identity disorder and dual personalities. There had always been many conflicts in the field of dissociative identity disorder. After all, the research in this field wasn't very deep. There weren't many patients with dissociative identity disorder in the world. However, some said that the first personality wouldn't be taken over by the other personalities. Some said that not only would the first personality be killed and taken over, but once another personality took over the body, the person would never be able to come back. Yunshusha was also mentally prepared that Yo-Yo of the past would never be able to come back. Even though Yo-Yo had changed and had become cold and reclusive, she didn't dare to ask for more if he could come back alive. As long as Yo-Yo was safe and by her side, she would do her best to take good care of him. Even if the Yo-Yo of the past couldn't come back to her side, she didn't care. But in her heart, she still hoped for a miracle to happen. Even though this process might be more difficult than carrying a child for 10 months, she wasn't afraid. She also hoped that the Yo-Yo of the past could come back to her side. "Yo-Yo, are you back? Yunshusha, yo." She was so excited that she hugged Yo-Yo tightly and burst out in tears. However, the crying of the child in her arms gradually stopped until it was dead silent and did not make a single sound. "Yo-Yo, yo-yo, two, yo-yo, yo-yo-yo, yo, yo, yo-oh-oh, yo-yo-yo. Yo-yo, oh-oh-oh-oh-oh-oh, yo-oh. Of yo-oh-oh-oh-oh. Why are you crying?" Yo-Yo asked. Suddenly, he frowned and touched the corners of his eyes with his fingers. What he touched were the dried tears. Why, was he crying too? Yo-Yo frowned strangely and wiped the tears away. Yunshusha looked at him nervously and didn't move. She tried calling out to him carefully, "Yo-Yo?" Yo-Yo looked at her coldly. He didn't respond or reject her. Just like before, his face was cold and emotionless. Yunshusha's heart sank to the bottom of the abyss. Yo-Yo had disappeared again. Chapter 3608. How could this be? Yo-Yo, she thought that Yo-Yo was really back. She really thought that the gentle Yo-Yo from the past was back. But in the blink of an eye, he resumed his cold demeanor. How could this be? Yunshusha said anxiously. Just now, it was Yo-Yo, she cried to Muyaja, her heart aching. Just now, I heard Yo-Yo calling me mommy. Muyaja hugged Yunshusha's shoulders and kissed her forehead. Shusha, don't be like this. Don't be anxious. Didn't we agree to take it slow? Yunshusha turned around and looked at the child in her arms. Suddenly, she pleaded, please, let Yo-Yo come back, please? I want to see Yo-Yo. I want to see Yo-Yo. She didn't know what nonsense she was spouting, but her mind was in a mess. The only thing she could realize was that there seemed to be two souls residing in this child's body. One was the yo-yo from the past. The other was the yo-yo who had been given the name Gong Fan. She missed yo-yo. She wanted to see that yo-yo again and hear him call her mommy. She wanted that yo-yo to come back. All this while, she had been waiting patiently. But her hope had been dashed again. Her disappointed expression had undoubtedly agitated the child. The child looked at her coldly and finally said, "I'm not yo-yo." "Then let yo-yo come back, please." She lowered her posture to the lowest possible level and was practically begging him with an incomparably pleading tone. The child suddenly felt frustrated. Yo-yo, yo-yo, yo-yo. Hearing this name that didn't belong to him every day, his ears were about to grow calluses. So, this woman was being so gentle to him because she wanted to awaken that yo-yo? What she needed was yo-yo. Whether it was Yunshusha, Muyaja, or Yuyao, what they needed was yo-yo, not him. What was laughable was that he was actually moved by her gentleness. He actually instinctively yearned for this warmth and tenderness. Instinctively, he wanted to rely on her, wanted to hug her. However, from the beginning to the end, he was treated as another yo-yo. What she needed, what she loved, and what she missed, was never him. All this while, he had been needed, cared for, and loved. It was all because they wanted to find the shadow of yo-yo in him. It was as if this body had always belonged to yo-yo and he had been treated as an invader, occupying this body as an enemy. He had never been needed. Or even rejected by them. Was he hated? Or rejected? He also wanted to try his best to adapt to the role of yo-yo. But he wasn't yo-yo. So, stop calling him yo-yo. The child was anxious and frustrated. He pushed her away forcefully. "I've said it before. I'm not yo-yo." Yunshusha was pushed to the ground and her eyes were filled with shock. Muyaja also looked at him in disbelief. He didn't expect him to revert back to that cold and aloof self when he had just returned to the Mu family. The child was obviously losing control of his emotions. He stood up and his body swayed slightly. The child tried his best to stabilize himself and turned to look at Yunshusha. He said in disappointment and anger, "Don't call me that again. I'm not yo-yo. I'm not yo-yo." Chapter 3609. Yunshusha was heartbroken when she heard that. She immediately said, "Yo-yo, don't say such silly things. How are you not yo-yo? You are. You are. Enough." Yo-yo covered his ears uncontrollably and said in despair, "Don't call me that again." After he said that, he turned around and his slender figure disappeared into the bustling crowd. Yo-yo, Yunshusha chased after him anxiously. However, it was too crowded. Yo-yo was not tall and was very skinny. He managed to squeeze through the crowd. However, she was blocked by the crowd. "What should we do?" Muyaja held her hand and comforted her. "Don't worry." He held her hand and followed the direction in which Yo-yo had left. They pushed through the crowd and chased after him. "Yo-yo, yo-yo," the voices were still ringing in his ears. Yo-yo closed his eyes tightly. His fragile body seemed to be on the verge of collapsing in the crowd. "Don't call me that again, don't." He finally calmed down. However, when he looked around, he was surrounded by the crowd. On the stage, rock music was playing intensely. The crowd was also excited by the explosive rhythm. Some of them sang loudly along with the music. Some of them screamed hysterically. Yo-yo felt a little dizzy. He felt that the noise was getting further and further away. All he could hear was the buzzing of the crowd. "Excuse me." Someone rushed over and pushed through the crowd. When he saw Yo-yo in front of him, he pushed him hard. Yo-yo lost his balance and almost fell. There were so many people. If he fell, he would definitely be stepped on mercilessly by the crowd. Just as he was about to fall, an arm suddenly supported his center of gravity. "Are you okay?" A woman's gentle voice was heard. Yo-yo frowned. He was a little surprised. Who was it? Was it her? Yunshusha? When he raised his head, he saw a woman's face that he didn't recognize. The woman in front of him was delicate and pretty. Her every movement gave off a heroic aura that ordinary women did not have. Yo-Yo narrowed his eyes and sized her up. "You are." Chu-Ho looked at the child in front of him. He suddenly felt that he looked familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen him before. Behind her, Jiyu Jinglian walked over with baby Chu in his arms. Lin Shi followed beside him and was puzzled to see Chu-He grabbing a child's arm. Jiyu Jinglian's handsome face darkened when he saw the child's face clearly. "It's you." Yu turned to look at the man, and his eyes instantly turned gloomy. "Jiyu." When enemies met enemies, and Yo-Yo Jiyu Jinglian's face turned pale when he saw Yo-Yo. Chu-Ho was surprised when he saw his expression. "What's wrong? Do you know this child?" The man snorted coldly and said in an unfriendly tone, "I don't just know him. He also had a deep hatred. He still had a score to settle with this child." Yo-Yo took a step back cautiously. A tiger would be bullied by a dog. This was not Hurricane, and he was alone. He would not gain anything if he went head-to-head with Jiyu Jinglian. Just as he was about to leave, Jiyu Jinglian grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up. "Why are you running?" Chapter 36:10. "He's just a child." "You, child?" Jiyu Jinglian sneered. "He's not an ordinary child." He turned his head and fixed his gaze on Yo-Yo's face. His eyes were cold. "He's from the Gong family, Gong Fan from the Hurricane Group. He's not an ordinary child." Gong Fan. Hearing this name, Chu-Ho's face also showed a surprised expression. Gong Fan, that was the child who had used her and Xiao Bao as a hostage to force Jiyu Jinglian to sign the agreement to cede Worth to him? How could he be so young? She looked so soft and squishy. She couldn't tell how vicious and merciless this child was. Yo-Yo was very calm. He narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "Jiyu Jinglian, I dare you to touch me." Before he could finish speaking, Jiyu Jinglian flicked his finger hard on the man's forehead with a loud and crisp sound. Yo-Yo felt a concussion in his head and felt dizzy for a moment. He felt that his forehead was about to be shattered by this flick of his finger. Jiyu Jinglian said coldly, "This is my territory in Beijing. You asked me if I dare to touch you. What do you think?" Yo-Yo was not afraid at all. He raised his leg and kicked him in his weakest spot. This move was ruthless, but Jiyu Jinglian had expected it and dodged in time. This child was really ruthless. Was this kick going to end his lineage? Jiyu Jinglian would not let him off so easily. He kicked him in the butt. Yu, who had nowhere to hide, took the full brunt of the kick. He frowned in pain, but he did not show it on his face and maintained his composure. "Jiyu Jinglian. You." Before he could finish, Jiyu Jinglian pinched his face and pulled hard. Rumor has it that the ruthless successor of the Hurricane Group, Gong Fan, is just SOSO without those mercenaries and bodyguards. However, this little guy was weak, yet he was still so arrogant. Who was he trying to show off to? Showing off in his territory? Was he courting death? In a hotel room next to the square, a grey-haired middle-aged man sat on the windowsill with a bottle of wine in his hand. He was drunk and on the verge of collapsing. If it weren't for the guardrails outside the windows of the room, he would have lost his balance and fallen. He picked up the wine bottle and took a big gulp. When he opened his eyes again, there was a terrifying murderous intent in them. In the square, the crowd was bustling with noise. The crowd danced to the music, getting high. However, the livelier the crowd was, the more the man felt indignant. Just last month, he was fired by the company. Half of his life, he worked hard for the company, but all he got in return was a letter of dismissal. He lost his job, and his wife left him with their child. Just a few days ago, he saw his wife walking on the street with another strange man. They looked so sweet. Only then did he suspect that his wife had betrayed him. For so many years, he had suffered untold hardships. In order to support his family, he had been constantly on the move every day. In order to support his family, he had almost exhausted all his energy. In the end, what did he get in return? In exchange, he was chased away by the company and betrayed by his wife. Even his son refused to meet him. He had wanted to visit him several times, but his son avoided him. He even said that he would never acknowledge him as his father. What did he do wrong? Chapter 36:11. He looked down at the crowd in the square. Every single one of them was so happy. He then looked at himself. He was like an orphan who was abandoned by the world. Why did the world only give him endless despair when the others were so happy? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was unfair. Since the world had abandoned him, then don't blame him for taking revenge on the world. The man finished his glass of white wine in one gulp and took out an AK-47 from under the windowsill. He swayed as he crouched beside the windowsill. He held the gun and loaded it clumsily. Then, he aimed the gun at the crowd and slowly pulled the trigger. He was already drunk. However, he did not need to aim in front of so many people. Every single one of them was worth it. Even if he died, he would not have lived in vain with so many people accompanying him to the grave. Suddenly, the man laughed arrogantly. Da. He pulled the trigger and fired wildly at the crowd. In the square, Jiyu Jinglian suddenly heard gunshots. He looked towards the direction of the sound. The square was too big, and the music on the stage was still loud. Therefore, he could not tell where the gunshots came from. Gunshots? Why were there gunshots? He could not have heard wrongly. Those were gunshots. Chu-ho also heard the gunshots that were almost drowned out by the noise. Based on the sound, it should be an AK-47. Someone was shooting at the crowd. Some of the people in the square suddenly screamed in fear. However, these screams were drowned out by the cheering crowd. The singer on the stage still did not realize what was going on. He was still sweating profusely as he held the microphone and performed with all his might. Most of the people in the crowd did not realize that the Grim Reaper was quietly approaching. Therefore, everyone was immersed in the music. The sound manipulator also realized that something was wrong. He received a radio message saying that someone was shooting at the crowd and asked for the music to be stopped immediately. The sound manipulator immediately stopped the music. The staff went on stage and covered the singer as he left the stage. The music suddenly stopped. Da. Gunshots were heard not far away. It was very obvious. It's gunshots. What's going on? Ah. Run. It's a terrorist attack. Someone is shooting at the crowd. Run. Some people were hit by bullets. Some bullets pierced through their heads, some pierced through their shoulders, and some pierced through their chests. For a moment, the huge square was shrouded in blood and darkness. Seeing that their companions were injured, many people were so frightened that they screamed and cried. Help! Someone's injured, call an ambulance. However, at this time, most people were focused on running for their lives. How could they care about others? The crowd frantically rushed towards the exit. Many people who were shot and fell to the ground were once again trampled by the frenzied crowd. Some who were still breathing were directly trampled to death. Some were running for their lives, while others were crying. For a moment, the scene was chaotic. Yo-Yo's eyes flashed with astonishment when he heard the gunshot, too. Someone opened fire. Chu-ho turned to look at Jiyu Jinglian. Get out of here. She immediately crouched down and carried Yo-Yo. Jiyu Jinglian carried Xiao Bao and held Lin Shi's hand as they ran towards the exit of the square. Crouch down. Jiyu Jinglian ordered Chu-ho. Chapter 36:12. At this moment, Yo-Yo suddenly thought of Yun Shusha. She and Mu Yaja were still at the square. No. They were in danger. Yo-Yo started to struggle. Let go of me. Jiyu Jinglian said angrily. Are you crazy? Do you want to die? Let go of me. Yo-Yo said to Chu-ho, I want to go back. Chu-ho did not allow him to struggle and hugged him even tighter. It's too dangerous to go back. Quickly leave this place. Yo-Yo said coldly, I don't need you to care about me. Let go of me. Let go. Impossible. Chu-ho had a strong sense of justice. No matter what, Yo-Yo was just a child. She could not leave a child in such a dangerous place. Yo-Yo grabbed her collar tightly. I said, let go of me. You don't have to be responsible for my life or death. As he said that, he kicked Chu-ho hard. Chu-ho felt the pain and almost fell down. This was a rare opportunity. Yo-Yo broke free from her grip and ran towards the crowd after regaining his senses. Chu-ho turned around in shock. She could not believe it. Usually, a child in this situation, like Xiao Bao, would have panicked and run away. He would be so scared that he would hide in an adult's arms and tremble in fear. Even someone as calm as Lin, she would obediently hold Jiyu Jinglian's hand and go with the flow. However, this child insisted on walking into the crowd. Did he not know that the gunman was lying in ambush in some corner and was shooting randomly at the crowd? The more people there were, the more dangerous it was. There was a possibility of being shot at any time. Moreover, bullets did not have eyes. No one knew how many bullets the shooter had in his hands. In such a big square, there were so many people. Everyone was a live target. It was obvious that this was a terrorist attack. There was no premeditated plan or target. It was purely for venting and revenge. Going back would be suicide. Jiyu Jinglian said coldly, "Don't bother about him. No one could stop a person who wanted to die." When he returned to the crowd, Yo-Yo scanned the crowd with his eyes. However, his height was limited. Just maintaining the center of the crowd and not being knocked down by the people running away in a panic was already exhausting. He looked around anxiously as he avoided the crowd. Just as he was about to shout, "Mom," his voice stopped abruptly. In his subjective consciousness, he was unwilling to be called this name. But now, if he didn't call them that, how would he find them and meet up with them? Where are they? Are they still in the square? No way. They must be looking for him everywhere. They must still be here. Yo-Yo couldn't care less anymore. She shouted at the top of her lungs, "Mommy, Daddy, where are you?" He was like a small boat, desperately going against the flow of people, running towards the center of the square. "Mommy, Daddy." He turned around and searched every face. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. He rushed forward and grabbed the hem of that person's shirt. "Mommy." The woman turned around, but her face was covered in blood. She pushed his hand away almost instantly and ran towards the exit, following the flow of people. It wasn't her. Then where could she be? Yo-Yo was even more flustered. He continued to go against the flow of people. "Mommy. Mommy." Gradually, his voice sounded like he was about to cry. He looked around helplessly. The lights on the stage were off. The square was plunged into a deathly silence. Chapter 36:13. Mommy. Yo-Yo kept searching in the crowd. He did not dare to look in one direction as he was afraid that he would miss something. However, just as he was looking deeper into the crowd, he heard gunshots. Not far away, the gunmen were still hiding in the dark and kept shooting at the crowd. Swoosh. Yo-Yo felt the bullet graze his hair. In the next second, an endless amount of hot blood suddenly splashed onto his face. The bullet mercilessly pierced the neck of a woman beside him. The woman fell to the ground. Yo-Yo was standing beside her. His warm body pressed her under him. Yo-Yo was shocked. He felt the world spinning around him. He could only feel a heavy body pressing on top of him. He tried to push her away, but the woman's body gradually turned cold. When he pushed her, her head flipped over, revealing a pair of empty and withered eyes. Because it was too sudden, she was hit all of a sudden. She even maintained a panicked expression on her face as she fled. There was no sign of life. Her face was as white as a sheet of paper. Her dark eyes were like an endless abyss that could swallow him up at any time. There was a bloody hole on her neck. The bullet had penetrated her neck and there was an explosive wound. The hot blood kept flowing on his body. It was sticky, warm, and smelled fishy. Yo-Yo was so scared that he could not speak. It was not that he had never seen a dead person, but he had never been so close to a corpse. He could even see from the woman's eyes how helpless, hesitant, perplexed, and uneasy she was before she died. Yo-Yo struggled for a while, but due to the difference in strength, he could not push the corpse away. He was gradually out of breath. Mommy, he was extremely anxious. He was worried that Yun Shusha and Mu Yaja would meet with mishap during this time. He did not know how long the shooting would last. He also did not know how many bullets the killer hiding in the dark had. He only knew that the crowd in the square retreated like locusts and stepped on his hand from time to time. Yo-Yo curled up into a ball and used all his strength to push the corpse away. He stood up shakily. Yo-Yo suddenly could not hear anything in the midst of such a chaotic crowd. It was as if the line of death was stretched out in his ears. Beep, beep, he turned around and looked around again. He looked at every face that was filled with fear and uneasiness. From time to time, someone would fall and never stand up again. It was like purgatory on earth. He did not know why, but there was an inexplicable sense of guilt in his heart. She was dead. She was killed by a gunshot. Yu lowered his head to look at his hands. Clenching them tightly, he dashed into the crowd again. Mommy. Yo-yo. Amidst the clamor, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. It was hysterical and almost cracked. It was her. It was Shusha. Yo-yo was agitated. He could no longer care about his demeanor. He pushed through the crowd and shouted loudly, "Mommy, where are you?" His voice was drowned out again. Perhaps his voice did not reach her ears at all. However, at least he could be sure that she was still in the square, still in the crowd. Why was she still here? Chapter 36:14. No way, she must be looking for him. He had to find her as soon as possible and get her out of here. Yo-yo shouted at the top of his lungs, "Mommy, Mommy, I'm here." In the crowd, Shusha and Muyaja were like headless flies, searching for Yo-yo's voice. Vaguely, they heard a child shouting at the top of his lungs. Shusha immediately stopped and listened carefully. Finally, she recognized that it was Yo-yo's voice. She turned around and grabbed Muyaja's hand excitedly. She asked, "Did you hear that?" Muyaja nodded. "Yeah, I heard it. I feel that Yo-yo is nearby. He's still at the square." Shusha was extremely touched. "He's looking for us too." Muyaja tried to identify the voice again and pointed in a direction. "The voice is coming from there. Hurry. We have to find him quickly. It's too dangerous." "Okay." The two of them kept moving through the crowd with their fingers interlocked. Shusha kept calling Yo-yo's name. "Yo-yo, Yo-yo, Mommy is here." At the same time, Yo-yo followed the direction of Shusha's voice. In the crowd, Muyaja used his height advantage and finally saw Yo-yo. He immediately squeezed through the crowd and rushed towards Yo-yo. Yo-yo, Shusha also saw him. She chased after him and hugged Yo-yo tightly. Yo-yo didn't see her, and before he could react, Shusha hugged him tightly. He looked up and saw that it was Shusha and Muyaja. The huge rock in his heart was finally lifted. "You're okay." Shusha cried tears of joy. She hugged him with lingering fear. The embrace of surviving a disaster made her arms tremble. Just now, when the gunshot sounded, she immediately realized that there was danger. Muyaja said that someone had attacked the crowd. According to the direction of the gunshots, they vaguely came from the direction of the hotel. He guessed that someone was probably hiding in the hotel room, shooting at the crowd with a machine gun or an AK-47. Shusha and Muyaja were worried that something might have happened to Yo-yo, so they kept looking in the direction where Yo-yo had run. Along the way, Shusha was extremely worried. Now, the scene was chaotic. The crowd was rushing toward the exit, and gunshots were constantly heard. Among the panicked crowd, people could be seen falling to the ground and being trampled on until they spat out blood. It was not hard to see that in the midst of the pushing and shoving, some people had fallen in front of the railing, and their shoulders had been pierced by the sharp railing. It was too scary. When Shusha thought that Yo-yo might have been in such danger, she was anxious. Thank goodness. Thank God. Yo-yo was fine. Shusha hugged Yo-yo tightly. At this moment, gunshots were heard again. She screamed in fear and covered Yo-yo as they lay on the ground. Muyaja also used his body to protect the mother and son. Looking around, he saw that the crowd was retreating. This meant that the density of the crowd was decreasing, and the possibility of them being exposed to the killers was increasing. They were in danger of being shot at any time. When the gunshots stopped, Muyaja held Shusha's arm and said, "We can't stay here for long. Let's go." As he said that, he helped the mother and son up and ran in the direction of the crowd. Chapter 36:15. He was very tall. Even if a bullet was fired at him, he would be the first to be hit. Shusha and Yo-yo would definitely be safe. It was almost instinctive for him to want to protect them from harm. Yoon Shusha was in a panic and did not notice Mu Yaja's special position. Yo-Yo, on the other hand, was very sensitive and noticed it immediately. Mu Yaja was protecting them. Yo-Yo suddenly felt a strange feeling in her heart. Touched. Guilty. Mixed feelings. Let's go this way. Mu Yaja pulled Yoon Shusha's arm while Yoon Shusha protected Yo-Yo. The three of them ran towards the crowd. The police sirens were heard. The police cars and ambulances were alerted and rushed over. On the other side of the square, there was a big crowd on the street facing the road. Everyone had scattered here and left the square. This was a temporary safe zone. Yo-Yo saw many people either kneeling on the ground or lying on the ground. They were hugging their heads and crying. Many of them were injured. Although the injuries were not fatal, they had lost a lot of blood. Some of them were out of danger and immediately called their family and friends to tell them that they were safe. Some of them were crying as they talked on the phone. They had not recovered from the shock of surviving a disaster. Some couples were hugging each other. Some were hugging their injured friends and crying in fear. Help! There are injured people here. Where's the doctor? Where's the nurse? Quick, save me. There were many children in the crowd. They were so frightened by this sudden incident that they started crying. The parents kept comforting and hugging them. Yoon Shusha held Yo-Yo's hand and ran all the way here. She was exhausted. After making sure that they had arrived safely, she was so frightened that she fell to the ground. She did not have the energy to say another word. Mu Yaja also knelt on the ground. Yo-Yo looked at him and was shocked by the blood on his shoulder. Yo-Yo stared straight at him. She pointed at his shoulder and said, Your shoulder is covered in blood. When Yoon Shusha heard this, she turned around and looked at Mu Yaja. She was frightened by the blood-stained sleeve on his shoulder. She threw herself at him, looking helplessly at the blood-stained sleeve on his shoulder. She asked anxiously, What happened? I'm fine. Don't worry. I was probably grazed by a bullet. Earlier, when he was running all the way here, he didn't realize that he was injured. He only knew that he had to leave this dangerous area as soon as possible, so he didn't realize that he was injured. Yoon Shusha did not know what to do, but Yo-Yo was the first to run over. He gently pushed Yoon Shusha away and said to Mu Yaja, Sit down. He was too tall. He couldn't move. Mu Yaja disagreed. Don't worry. Sit down. Mu Yaja had no choice but to sit down. Yo-Yo pinched the ends of his sleeve and tore it open forcefully. He heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the wound. He thought that he had been hit by a bullet. He looked at the wound. It was only grazed by a bullet and there was a lot of blood. He cleaned the wound a little, tore a piece of cloth from his shirt, and simply bandaged the wound. He pressed on it to stop the bleeding. Yoon Shusha was stunned. Yo-Yo knew why she was surprised. He explained, I've learned some basic bandaging and bleeding control. These were not difficult. If he was injured at a critical moment, the most important thing was to stop the bleeding. This was what Lisa had taught him. These were the most basic first aid techniques. Chapter 36:16. At first, he was not willing to learn, but Lisa forced him to learn. After all, he often went to war zones. If there was an accident, she could not be by his side to protect him. If he was injured, basic bleeding control could save his life. Mu Yaja saw Yoon Shusha's worried expression and immediately comforted her. Don't worry, it's just a simple scratch. It's nothing serious. It's good that you're okay. Yoon Shusha sat in front of him, still in a state of shock. She wiped away her tears and heaved a sigh of relief as she finally calmed down. The police arrived quickly. With the clues provided, they immediately sneaked into the hotel and checked the rooms one by one. Finally, the attacker in a room on the 15th floor was killed on the spot. When they entered the room, everyone was shocked. The room had become an armory. There were AK-47s, machine guns, pistols, and even grenades that were not thrown out in time. It was hard to imagine how terrifying the situation would be if grenades were thrown into such a dense crowd. At that time, the number of casualties would probably increase by several times. The specific reason for the attack would have to wait until the case was filed for investigation. However, this was probably the most violent social terrorist incident in a long time. In the huge square, there were countless casualties. Preliminary estimates put the number of casualties in the hundreds. In the past, there had never been such a bad public security incident. The law in the country strictly controlled firearms. It was illegal to carry a gun. Ordinary criminals did not have such channels to get their hands on guns. This attack had never happened before. Yun Shusha called Gong Jie. Gong Jie handed Yuyaro to the nanny and drove over. However, the square was heavily congested with traffic. All the vehicles had to make way for the police cars and ambulances. There were more than 10 ambulances that were constantly transporting the injured. Cries, sobs, and screams were still incessant. Yun Shusha looked at the square through the railing. From afar, she could see that the ground was in a mess. Many light sticks were scattered on the ground, drink bottles, cans, and many corpses were scattered on the ground, as well as the wailing injured. It was hard to imagine that not long ago, this place was peaceful. Music, beer, light sticks, cheers, and screams. Now, it had become hell on earth. Hundreds of corpses were piled on the ground, and blood flowed like a river. Yun Shusha had never seen such a scene before. She still felt that this was a complete nightmare. The scene was cordoned off and maintained. Yo-Yo also stared blankly, unable to react for a long time. This accident, without the need for an official announcement, had already been defined as a bad shooting. How could this be? How could this be? The tragic cries still echoed in his ears. For the first time in her life, Yo-Yo felt that weapons could bring about such a terrifying hell. They were considered lucky. If they weren't lucky enough, it would be him, or Mommy, or Muyaja. Perhaps it was one of the corpses in the square. For the first time in his life, he hated guns. This was something that could only bring death. In her mind, she suddenly recalled the words he had said in the past. I want all the wars in this world to end because of me, and to be born because of me. But what was before them was war. However, after experiencing death for themselves, perhaps only then did they realize how terrifying death and war were. Chapter 36:17. Gong Jie finally arrived at the scene. When Yun Shusha saw him, she walked over and said to Gong Jie, Shou Jie, your brother-in-law is injured. Hurry up and send him to the hospital. What's going on? Gong Jie did not know what had happened. When he arrived, he saw Yo-Yo standing alone at the side, looking at the cordoned-off square. Her back view looked lonely and bleak. Yun Shusha was guarding Muyaja. Not long ago, someone was shooting at the square with a gun. There were many casualties. Gong Jie questioned, where's the ambulance? I saw many ambulances coming here. Yun Shusha shook her head and said, there are too many injured people. Those who are seriously injured take priority. Muyaja was only grazed, so the ambulance only bandaged him. Yun Shusha was extremely anxious. Even though Muyaja kept comforting her, saying that it was just a small injury and that it was not a big deal. But she was very anxious. Gong Jie checked Muyaja's injury. It was indeed a small injury. Once the bleeding stopped, it would not be a big deal. A graze from a bullet would not leave any scars. He also said, Shusha, don't worry too much. I've taken a look. It's really a small injury. Seeing that Gong Jie also said so, Yun Shusha was relieved. When Muyaja said that it was a small injury, she thought that he was afraid that she would be worried and comforted her, so he said that. Gong Jie understood the situation and was a little surprised when he found out what had just happened. The security in Beijing is very good. Why would there be a shooting incident for no reason? Yun Shusha was also confused. Yo-Yo suddenly turned around and said coldly, it's probably to take revenge on society. When Gong Jie heard this, he did not say much. He only said, get in the car. Even if it's just a minor injury, it still needs to be treated as soon as possible. Muyaja nodded and stood up. He said to Gong Jie, don't go to the big hospital in the city center. There are a lot of injured people there. With this wound, any hospital will do. All right. The three of them got into the car, and Gong Jie drove them to a relatively remote area. They randomly found a medium-sized hospital. The way in was very congested, but the way out was much wider. The ambulance prioritized sending the injured to the nearest hospital. Therefore, The few big hospitals near the city center were all overcrowded. In comparison, although this hospital was a little out of the way, it was fortunate that there were not many people. Soon, the queue was filled. While Mu Yaja was treating his wounds, Yo-Yo bumped into Jiyu Jinglian again in the corridor. Who would have thought that the two of them would be so fated to be admitted to the same hospital? Jiyu Jinglian was not injured. The one who was injured was Lin Shi. When he was leaving with the crowd, he got a small cut on his arm by a fallen railing. He needed a few stitches. When the two of them met again, Jiyu Jinglian did not expect that Yo-Yo would be safe and sound. When he saw Yo-Yo running against the crowd to the center of the square, he thought that he must have been killed. Even if he could dodge the bullets, he would not be able to dodge the crowd. He was afraid that he would suddenly fall and be trampled by the crowd. There were so many injured people. Some of them were shot by the bullets, while most of them were trampled by the crowd when they fell. Some of them were not injured, but many of them were trampled to death when they fell in the crowd. When Jiyu Jinglian saw Yun Shusha sitting behind Yo-Yo, he immediately understood why he was in such a hurry to come back. He was looking for someone. Chapter 36:18. He did not expect the cold and heartless child to have such a soft side. Jiyu Jinglian was a little surprised. When Yo-Yo saw Jiyu Jinglian, he lowered his head and did not say anything. Jiyu Jinglian crossed his arms. "Why, don't you recognize me?" When Yun Shusha heard the voice, she looked up and saw Jiyu Jinglian. Her eyes widened in surprise. She recognized him. Jiyu Jinglian, the head of the Jiyu family in Beijing. He was also Jiyu Xingzi's elder brother. Why was he here? Yo-Yo suddenly stood up and walked in front of him. He said coldly, "If there's anything, don't talk about it here." With that said, he tugged at his sleeve and led him to a corner. When he turned around, Yo-Yo's gaze was filled with hostility. "Jiyu Jinglian, what exactly is it that you're haunting me like a ghost?" Jiyu Jinglian crossed his arms in front of his chest calmly. "What do I have to do with you, Gong Fan? We haven't settled the score between us yet." "What score?" "The matter in North Africa is not something that can be forgotten so easily," Jiyu Jinglian said expressionlessly. "Werther is the core of the Jiyu family in North Africa. You used those despicable methods to take it away from me. How are we going to settle this score?" "Despicable?" Yo-Yo did not think much of it. He said faintly, "Jiyu Jinglian, don't make yourself sound so noble. I don't need to mention how you got that piece of land in Werther, right? That piece of land in Werther used to belong to Hurricane. In order to get that piece of land, the Jiyu family did not necessarily use honorable methods. Now, he was saying that he was despicable. So what? He only looked at the results and did not ask about the process. Jiyu Jinglian sized him up silently. Suddenly, he squatted in front of him and said slowly, "I have to say, you're really impressive to have such skills at such a young age. However, I did lose the matter in North Africa. I have no objections. However, I hope that you won't go against me in the future." He paused for a moment and said with some difficulty, "After all, you're just a child. If I'm too harsh on you, I'll be going too far." The boy's lips curled into a smile when he heard that. "I also hope that you won't go against me. Otherwise, I will also feel very embarrassed to have you suffer so much." The two of them had similar auras, so it was difficult to determine who was superior. Jiyu Jinglian's thin lips twitched slightly. The capital city had always been a place of strife, and there had never been a lack of open and veiled struggles. However, since Mu Yaja married Yun Shusha, withdrew from the strife, and focused on his family, the Xingyu Financial Group's aggressive expansion had also been restrained a little. Without such a strong opponent, Jiyu Jinglian could not help but feel bored. Still, with a powerful up-and-coming talent like Yun Tianyu around, it would not be too boring for her. Jiyu Jinglian stood up, touched his head provocatively, and turned to leave. Yo-Yo watched his back coldly and returned to Yun Shusha's side. At this time, Mu Yaja's wound had been treated. Seeing him appear out of nowhere, he asked suspiciously, "Where did you go just now?" Yo-Yo turned his face away and did not say a word. It was as if he had returned to the day when he had just returned to the Mu family and locked himself in his own world, as if he was isolated from the world. Mu Yaja was stunned. but he smiled. He understood his son's character. He was arrogant, sharp-tongued, and insincere. Chapter 36:19. He heard Yo-Yo calling him Daddy. He heard Yo-Yo calling him Daddy. His heart was burning with anxiety. That was enough. At least it proved that his Yo-Yo had never left. Mu-Yaja suddenly hugged Yo-Yo from behind and lifted him up. Yun Shusha saw this and couldn't help but say angrily, "You're injured and you're still so restless." However, Mu-Yaja said, "It's nothing. It's just a small injury." He bent down and gently kissed Yo-Yo's forehead. Yo-Yo's face instantly heated up. He turned his face away awkwardly to avoid him. With an unnatural expression, he said, "What are you doing?" "Carrying my son." Mu-Yaja saw that Yo-Yo was blushing adorably. He lowered his voice and whispered in his ear, "Just now at the square, you were so anxious to call me Daddy. Now you're acting as if you don't care. You're still the same as before, saying one thing and meaning another." Yo-Yo looked even more uncomfortable. He struggled and said, "Let go of me." As he struggled slightly, Mu-Yaja's face showed a hint of pain. "Ouch, it hurts." Yo-Yo was nervous for a moment. He thought that his struggle had affected his wound. For a moment, he didn't dare to move. Mu-Yaja saw this and snickered in his heart. Beside him, Yun Shusha and Gong Jie looked at each other and snickered in their hearts. This proved that Yo-Yo was still the same as before. Although he was awkward, he still knew how to care for others. On the island, the sea breeze danced. Mu-Chen suddenly woke up from his nightmare. Outside the window, the sun was already shining brightly. It was a dream. He held his forehead with a headache. When he woke up just now, he had completely forgotten the contents of his dream. He only knew that in his dream, he seemed to be very sad and upset. He seemed to have dreamt of Yo-Yo. Yo-Yo, half a month had passed since she swapped identities with Yo-Yo. However, he was still not used to everything on the island. Boredom, loneliness, solitude, desolation. Sometimes, when Lisa was around, there was a companion. Although Lisa wasn't good with words and didn't like to talk, she didn't dare to start a conversation with Xiao Chen. She always acted indifferent. However, regardless of whether she liked to talk or not, at least she had someone to keep her company. When Lisa was not around, Xiao Chen had developed the ability to communicate with objects. Sometimes, he would talk to himself while walking. Ask and answer questions to yourself. If he didn't do that, he wouldn't know how to prove that he was still alive. Apart from breathing, thinking, and talking, Xiao Chen felt like he was about to go crazy from boredom on this island. Lisa secretly gave him a tablet. With the tablet, when Xiao Chen was bored, he would play games on the tablet to pass the time. He downloaded a pet training game called Pet Manor. In the game, he could adopt pets, build a pet manor, raise pets, and even talk to them. After training, the pets could even understand his commands and respond accordingly. He had a French bulldog named Yo-Yo and a ragdoll cat named Lisa. One day, Xiao Chen held the tablet and talked to Yo-Yo. "Lie down." On the screen, the cream-colored French bulldog lay down obediently. It stuck out its tongue and tilted its head to look at him. Xiao Chen rubbed its round head and barked again, "Yo-Yo." The bulldog barked in joy. Woof. Chapter 36:20. The bulldog barked in joy. Woof. What's 1 + 1? The bulldog hesitated for a few seconds and barked a few times. Xiao Chen continued, "What's 3 + 9 to 4 + 15 to 80 + 2? The bulldog was stunned and looked at him in confusion. Xiao Chen was amused and laughed out loud. "Look, you don't even know how to add and subtract such simple numbers. You always say that I'm an idiot, but I think you're the idiot." "Idiot, Yo-Yo." The bulldog understood the word idiot and lay on the ground weakly, revealing an innocent and pitiful expression. The ragdoll cat, Lisa, walked past Yo-Yo gracefully and curled up into a ball in the cat bed. Xiao Chen said again, "Lisa, come here." The ragdoll cat licked her paws and turned her head lazily to look at him. However, she seemed indifferent and ignored him. Xiao Chen said unhappily, "Lisa, come here. Be good and listen to me." Only then did the ragdoll walk gracefully to the screen and sit beside Yu with a noble and inviolable look on her face. Xiao Chen said, "Lie down." Meow tilde Lisa meowed lazily but did not move. In this game, cats were the hardest to tame. Cats were arrogant, cold, clingy, indifferent, affectionate, and distant. They were especially hard to tame. So far, Xiaoichen had only learned one trick. Scratch him. Upon hearing this, Lisa turned around and swiped her claws at Yu. She was shockingly fierce. Ha ha ha. Xiaoichen was amused by this scene and laughed until he was rocking back and forth. When he looked up, he saw the real Lisa's cold face. Xiaoichen was scared out of his wits. He froze and did not dare to move. Lisa put the tablet on the table and asked in a neutral tone, "Is it fun?" "It's okay." He scratched his face. "Yeah, it's just to pass the time." "Is this game very fun?" Xiaoichen said awkwardly, "It's okay, I guess." Lisa glanced at him expressionlessly and her gaze fell on the screen. That noble ragdoll cat. At least he knew what was good for him. She was set to be a ragdoll cat. If she was set to be a dog, she would scratch him. Xiaoichen complained, "It's so boring to be alone in the castle. There's no one to play with me." "Are you still a 3-year-old child? Do you still need someone to play with you?" "Although I'm not a 3-year-old, I'm still a kid." Xiaoichen tugged at Lisa's sleeve and begged, "Lisa, play with me, okay? Let's go pick up seashells and make wind chimes. Gong Shaoying will be here tomorrow," Lisa suddenly said. Xiaoichen's expression froze. He stared at Lisa in astonishment and said suspiciously, "Didn't you say that Gong Shaoying usually doesn't come here? That's under normal circumstances." Lisa continued, "You haven't left the island for a long time and there hasn't been any news from you. Of course, Gong Shaoying will come and check on you. You have to remember that no matter what, you can't give yourself away when Gong Shaoying comes tomorrow." "What will happen if I give myself away?" Xiaoichen thought to himself, "This Gong Shaoying is my grandfather after all. Even if I give myself away, he won't say that he will slit my neck with a knife, right?" Lisa said, "If my identity is exposed, I will die." Xiaoichen was speechless. Chapter 36:21. Xiaoichen was shocked. Would Lisa be in trouble if his identity was exposed? Gong Shaoying was so cruel. It seemed like his grandfather was not cute at all. Xiaoichen felt wronged and said, "I'm innocent. I don't care." Lisa grabbed him by the collar and said coldly, "So I'm warning you, if you expose yourself, I won't let you off." "Then, how can I not expose myself?" Xiaoichen spread his hands and said, "Yo and I talk like each other, how can he recognize us?" "It's fine if you don't talk, but once you do, you expose your IQ." After a pause, Lisa continued, "How can a leader who founded the Hurricane Group be so stupid? Besides, do you think he doesn't know that your mommy gave birth to twins? Not only does he know, but he also knows the biggest difference between you and Yo." "Yes," she admitted. Yo and Xiaoichen really looked alike. However, this did not mean that they would not be exposed in front of a sly old fox like Gong Shaoying. Xiaoichen was curious and asked, "What's the difference?" Lisa said coldly, "One is talkative, the other is quiet." He was caught off guard. Xiaoichen felt wronged. He did not think that he was a talkative person. Why did everyone say that he was talkative? Anyway, when he comes, you should talk less, eat less, and make less facial expressions. Xiaoichen did not understand. "I can understand if you want me to talk less and make less facial expressions, but why should I eat less?" Lisa said expressionlessly, Yo eats very little, he doesn't eat as much as you. Usually, he only eats a few meals, but you ate 3 big bowls at once. It would be strange if he didn't suspect anything. Xiaoichen felt that what she said made sense. "Alright, he won't be here for long anyway. Although he won't be here for long, you can't let your guard down. Understand?" Xiaoichen saluted and said lazily, "Yes, sir. Isn't it just eating less, talking less, and making fewer expressions? I might as well lock myself in my room." Lisa raised her chin and said, "In fact, Yo has always been like this. He rarely leaves his room, so when he comes, you better stay in your room and don't go anywhere, okay?" "Got it." The next day, Xiaoichen woke up early and ate 2 big bowls of rice before Gong Shaoying arrived. However, by noon, Gong Shaoying was still nowhere to be seen. Could it be that he wasn't coming? Xiao Chen thought excitedly that it would be best if she didn't come. It would save him the trouble of pretending to be Yo-Yo. In the afternoon, while he was taking an afternoon nap, he vaguely heard the sound of the door closing. Then, he heard Lisa and Alice's voices. Xiao Chen turned over and squinted his eyes. Lisa, is he here? Master, young Master Fan is still taking an afternoon nap. Lisa didn't answer him immediately but said this instead. Xiao Chen frowned and opened one of his eyes. However, he was surprised to see that the bed was surrounded by a crowd. He sat up in surprise, only to see Lisa and Alice staring at him nervously and giving him meaningful looks. Xiao Chen snapped out of his daze and glanced at the other side of the bed. He saw a man in his 50s standing in front of the window. He was wearing a suit and a military-style waistcoat. He was tall and handsome, but when he looked at him, his aura was intimidating. Chapter 36:22. He recognized that this man with a strong aura was Gong Shaoying, his grandfather. Little Chen immediately retracted his expression and put on an extremely cold expression as he stared at him in a daze. Gong Shaoying looked at him and then at Alice. "How's his condition?" Alice immediately replied, "He's almost recovered. After a year of recuperation, the functions of his organs are basically the same as a healthy person's." Xiao Chen lowered his head silently. His cold expression was no different from Yo-Yo's. Lisa's heart finally settled down. Gong Shaoying came too suddenly. She had originally thought that something had happened at the last minute, so she cancelled her trip and wouldn't be coming. She didn't expect Gong Shaoying to come so suddenly. She wasn't mentally prepared for it. Xiao Chen was taking an afternoon nap, so Gong Shaoying asked to see Xiao Chen. She was worried that Xiao Chen would be in a daze and wouldn't be able to react in time, so she told him that he was resting. However, Gong Shaoying insisted on seeing him. She couldn't stop him, so she led him into the room uneasily. Fortunately, Xiao Chen reacted quickly. Even though he had just woken up and was confused, he wasn't so muddle-headed that he would give himself away. Gong Shaoying sat down on the side of the bed and said slowly, "Why didn't you call me?" Xiao Chen looked up at him, but his mind skipped a beat. Lisa didn't mention how Yo-Yo usually addressed Gong Shaoying. "Old master," or "grandfather." Lisa hurriedly said, "Young Master Fan hasn't woken up yet." Gong Shaoying laughed when he heard that. "Even if he's still asleep, he can't have forgotten how to address me, right?" Xiao Chen's heart suddenly felt uneasy. In the Gong family, etiquette was very important. When a junior met a senior, they would greet them. This was etiquette. Gong Shaoying valued etiquette. Even the arrogant Gong Jie would have to greet his elders respectfully when he returned to Gong Shaoying. There was a clear distinction between seniority and inferiority. Xiao Chen glanced at Lisa and noticed that she was clenching her fists nervously. For a moment, he also felt uneasy. "Outer." He called out tentatively while cautiously looking at Lisa to observe her expression. Seeing that Lisa did not express any strange attitude, he knew that calling him grandpa was the right thing to do. "Grandfather," he called out in a low voice. Gong Shaoying smiled in satisfaction. He patted his head and asked gently, "Are you still asleep?" Xiao Chen lowered his head and nodded lightly. Gong Shaoying smiled and said, "Sleep a little longer." When Xiao Chen heard that, he felt as if he had been granted amnesty and fell straight onto the bed. He wished that he could avoid having to deal with Gong Shaoying. It was simply a blessing that he could continue sleeping. This way, he would not have to rack his brains to think of a way to not expose himself. Gong Shaoying lowered his body and covered him with the blanket. Then, he stood up and walked out of the room. Before Lisa left, she whispered in his ear, "Yo-Yo is very respectful to old master. You must not give yourself away." "Okay." Lisa then left with a peace of mind. Xiao Chen lay in bed until night time. When it was dinner time, he could no longer escape. Xiao Chen then left the room and walked into the dining room. At that moment, everyone was seated at the table, including Gong Shaoying. Chapter 36:23. However, he pretended to be calm as he walked to the table and sat down. He picked up his cutlery and buried his head in his food. Gong Xiaoying suddenly put down his cutlery and asked, "Some time ago, you took over worthless piece of land. I didn't expect you to be able to take it back from Jiyu Jinglian. You're not simple." Xiao Chen was stunned but didn't say anything. Gong Xiaoying continued, "The factories on that piece of land will probably all be leveled soon. When do you plan to carry out the experiment that you came up with?" Xiao Chen was speechless. Experiment? What was an experiment? What was wortha? Gong Xiaoying said a bunch of terms that he didn't understand. How could he possibly answer this? How was he supposed to answer? Didn't they say that it would be fine as long as he ate less, spoke less, and made fewer expressions? How was he supposed to answer such a difficult question? Xiao Chen looked up blankly and looked at Lisa. However, he saw that she was holding her forehead and looked like she was having a headache. She also didn't expect that Gong Xiaoying would come this time to discuss the issue of the North African experimental base with her. Xiao Chen was speechless as he cut a piece of steak. He took a bite and swallowed it with difficulty. Seeing that Gong Xiaoying was staring at him, he elegantly wiped his mouth with a wet towel and said calmly, "I don't have any leads yet." Gong Xiaoying was speechless. Lisa was speechless. Alice choked on her dry red wine. Gong Xiaoying said suspiciously, "You were the one who suggested this experimental base. How can you say that you don't have any leads?" Xiao Chen's expression didn't change, but his back kept breaking out in cold sweat. Alice was worried that the matter would be exposed and quickly poked her head with her finger. When Xiao Chen saw this, he instantly realized that Alice must be hinting at something. But what did she mean by poking her head? Xiao Chen also poked his own head and suddenly said, "Is there something wrong with your head?" Alice raised her head in shock and stared at him in horror. Lisa's eyes were wide open. She did not expect Xiao Chen's comprehension ability to be so terrible. Gong Xiaoying was also stunned. What? What did he mean by there was something wrong with his brain? Alice facepalmed, looking like she was having a headache. When Xiao Chen saw this, he finally understood what she meant. He held his forehead and pretended to have a headache. Lisa immediately stood up and pretended to be worried as she walked over to his side and held his shoulder. "Young Master Fan, does your head hurt again?" "It hurts." Xiao Chen pretended to be patient and took a deep breath. "My head hurts." Lisa immediately looked at Alice worriedly. The latter also reacted. "Is it a reaction to the drug?" Gong Xiaoying looked at them suspiciously. "Headache?" Alice explained, "Some drugs will have a backlash effect and some strong side effects. It will stimulate the central nervous system of the brain and cause headaches." She was talking nonsense with a straight face,